Ned Stark stood in the godwood of Winterfell alone with his thoughts in the hush of the early morning. A dusting of frost clung to the bare branches overhead, while the red leaves of the heart tree stirred like ancient watchers, silent and patient. Ned could almost imagine that they listened to the whispers in his mind. He had always felt more at peace beneath those crimson leaves than anywhere else in the world, but today his heart beat with more than the simple burdens of the north. There was a secret he carried, a secret gleaned from old letters and half-forgotten knowledge, one that haunted him like a call to arms. In those moments, with the cool northern wind combing through his hair, he thought of Valyria and a stolen dragon egg said to be hidden somewhere in the north, a rumor he had only just unearthed and scarcely believed. He remembered the raven that had come late one night, weeks past. On its leg was strapped a message from an unexpected source, Maester Harmune of House Serwyn. In shaky script, the old maester had recounted a series of cryptic lines found in a crumbling tome. The lines spoke of a fragment of Valyrian lore, a relic carried away by a wandering knight centuries ago, a dragon egg, no less, rumored to have never hatched. And the final lines suggested that the egg, in the chaos following the doom of Valyria, was stolen by a reaver from the Basilisk Isles. Over the course of generations, the relic had vanished into the shadows of Westeros. Some believed it was smuggled across the narrow sea, others that it had been lost at sea. But Maester Harmune's fragment told another story, that a Northman, perhaps in service to some southern lord, had taken the egg as a prize and eventually brought it back to the north. The letter had unsettled Ned. The mere possibility of a Valyrian dragon egg in the north was extraordinary. Why had no one mentioned it before? How could such a secret remain hidden through the Targaryen rule and Robert's rebellion? And yet, he remembered his childhood, how old Nan would sometimes speak of dragons in hushed, cautionary tales. The Targaryen kings had once wielded dragonfire, forging the 7 kingdoms into a single realm. The idea that a dragon egg, especially from Valyria, might lie dormant and forgotten in the bleak snows of the north seemed an impossible dream. But Ned had a quiet fascination with impossible things. He had lived through events that no one could have predicted, from Robert's rebellion to the horrors of war. He had seen the White Walkers, well, not himself, but he had heard the rumors and never entirely dismissed them. There were more wonders in the world than men cared to acknowledge. In the days after he received the maester's letter, Ned had tried to focus on his duties, overseeing the training of young soldiers in the courtyard, settling disputes among his bannermen, ensuring Winterfell's stores were stocked for the next harsh winter. But the rumor of that Valyrian egg persisted in his thoughts. He sought counsel in the library tower, reading old manuscripts and scanning lines penned in the centuries after the doom. Most were contradictory, half-lost, or simply wrong. But one passage claimed that during the reign of Aegon III, a northern warrior had appeared at court with a dragon egg that would not hatch. Aegon III, Dragonbane, had been afraid of dragons, or so the histories said, and turned the man away. It was a story couched in so much rumor that Ned could hardly weigh its truth. Yet it lined up with the notion that the egg had ended up in the north. He asked Maester Luwin in confidence, but Luwin knew nothing certain. "There have always been rumors, my lord," he had said. "Superstitions. Everyone wants to believe there is a dragon hidden in their cellars. But I have never seen any proof." Despite his skepticism, Luwin helped glean more references, tracing faint lines in the earliest records. Always, the thread ended with no final mention. Just rumor that the egg was lost or stashed in a hidden vault, or even thrown into the winter sea as an offering to the drowned god. Some claimed it was as big as a war helm, others that it was small enough to hold in one hand. Indeed, there was no certainty. But one detail continued to appear. The glimpses of a wild tale that a certain Moor's Umber, generations past, had secretly borne a precious chest to his stronghold. Moors was an eccentric, or so the ancient records said. He had been known for traveling to strange lands, including Old Volantis and the ruins of Valyria itself. If he had indeed returned with a treasure, he would not have boasted of it publicly. The Umbers were proud and notoriously stubborn, but they also guarded secrets fiercely. If anyone in the north once had a Valyrian dragon egg, Ned supposed House Umber might be the ones. So he resolved to visit the Umbers, but quietly, discreetly. Telling no one beyond Maester Luwin, Ned set out with a small retinue, Jory Castle, his loyal captain of guards, and 4 trusted men, under the guise of a simple journey to ensure the Umbers had enough grain for the winter. He left at dawn, with only a short goodbye to Catelyn and his children. He had no wish to raise false hopes, or to provoke gossip about dragons. Even in the cold hush of winter's approach, secrets could burn faster than wildfire if they fell upon the wrong ears. Their journey took them over bleak hillsides dusted with snow, through rolling moorland, where the wind cut at them like knives. They reached Last Hearth after several days. Lord Umber, a great bear of a man with a booming laugh, greeted Ned warmly, though he was surprised by the visit. Jory and the other men made themselves at home among the fireside talk and ale, but Ned sought a private word with his host. In a side room, as the hearth crackled, Ned drew out the letter from Maester Harmune, along with some of the scraps Luwin had collected. He asked if the Umbers had any knowledge of an ancient dragon egg passed down through their line. At first, the Lord of Last Hearth scoffed. A dragon's egg? We've no Targaryen blood here. That's Southron fancy talk. Next, you'll be saying we keep a kraken in our well. But Ned's calm, earnest expression did not waver. Slowly, the large man's bluster faded, replaced by a cautious flicker in his eyes. Well, I've heard that Mors was half mad, Lord Umber admitted. Always going on about wonders beyond the seas. He did bring back odd relics. Once I saw a book that stank of brimstone whenever it was opened. Valyrian sorcery, they said. Maybe he did bring back something else. Ned pressed him further, as politely as he could. Eventually, Lord Umber gave a shrug, then rummaged among some old chests in a hidden storeroom that stank of dust and stale wolf pelts. He brought forth an iron-bound chest so old that its corners were eaten by rust. The lock was broken, the latch just barely holding. Inside was a piece of cloth embroidered with threads turned gray by time. Within that cloth lay what appeared to be an oblong stone, dark as coal but flecked with shimmering silver scales. It was no larger than Ned's forearm but heavy when he lifted it. It was cold to the touch, far colder than the surrounding air, as though it harbored some lingering frost at its core. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. Even if he had never touched one, he knew at once this was indeed a dragon egg. He recognized something of the swirling texture, reminiscent of the Targaryen eggs he had once glimpsed at King's Landing as a boy. This one, though, was different. The scales were not simply black with hints of red or green. They glinted faintly like hoarfrost, silver threaded with pale white. Beneath the torchlight, Ned imagined there was a swirl of pale blue in its depths. It looked as though winter itself had laid an egg. The old stories say it never hatched, Lord Umber said, crossing his arms. Mors tried everything to open it, or so the tale goes, dropped it in hot coals, doused it in direwolf's blood. Nothing. So eventually they just left it in this old trunk. Family curiosity, you might say. Ned felt an indescribable surge of awe, dread, and hope. A dragon in the north. If it were to hatch, what would that mean? Had the Targaryens known of this? Or was this truly a stolen egg from Valyria's demise, possessed of some unknown magic? He thanked Lord Umber gravely but asked him if House Stark could safeguard this relic. The big man seemed more than willing to part with the egg. His family had no use for a stone that did nothing. He joked that he wouldn't mind if Ned somehow managed to hatch a dragon for the north. Then maybe the Lannisters would think twice before messing with our business, he said with a guffaw. So Ned returned to Winterfell bearing the egg, his mind whirling with possibilities. He felt a weight of destiny in his hands that was unlike anything else he had carried. He was not delusional, he had no illusions that raising a dragon was an easy or even a possible feat, but his sense of duty to the north and his curiosity about Valyrian secrets compelled him. If the egg was truly stolen from Valyria, it might be older and stranger than any Targaryen egg. Perhaps it was never meant to hatch. Perhaps it was cursed or worthless. Yet a quiet voice in Ned's heart insisted that something momentous was about to unfold. In the privacy of Winterfell's crypts, he hid the egg in a stone alcove. He chose the crypts deliberately, recalling that dragon eggs were typically warmed by fire. But this egg felt touched by something else, something cold. Instead of placing it near a blazing hearth, Ned wondered if the chill of the north might somehow rouse it or at least guard it from undue attention. The crypts, though dark, were not entirely frigid, but they retained a perpetual chill that sank into the bones. There, surrounded by stark ancestors and the silent gloom of carved stone, Ned would slip away in the dead of night to check on the egg. He would hold it in his hands, feeling that faint, unnatural chill, and watch for any sign of change. Days passed. Then weeks. Catelyn noticed her husband's distraction, asked him what weighed upon him so heavily, but Ned hesitated to share the news. She had endured enough secrets during the years of Robert's rebellion. The last thing he wanted was to stir more uncertainty in her heart. Instead, he assured her that all was well, that his mind was on matters of the realm. Privately, though, he confided only in Maester Luwin, who found Ned's plan to keep the egg in the crypts curious but intriguing. Lewin examined it carefully, tapping it with small instruments, listening for any resonance. He found that the egg did not respond to heat at all. Light a brazier near it and it remained cold as ever. But place it in the darkness or set it on cool stone and faint silver lines would sometimes shimmer across its surface. This is no ordinary dragon egg, the maester concluded, voice hushed as though in reverence. But I cannot say what it truly is, only that the old Valyrians dealt in strange arts. Some believed in hybrid dragons or dragons attuned to elemental magics. My lord, we should be cautious. Ned nodded grimly. Caution was his way, yet a new possibility tugged at him. What if the egg was an ice dragon's egg? The notion was the stuff of bedtime stories. Old Nan had told tales of the monstrous ice dragons that prowled the shivering sea, their breath a cold mist that could freeze a man solid. But no one had ever truly confirmed such beasts existed outside of legends. Could the Valyrians have possessed an egg from one of those rumored creatures? Or was this a mutated dragon akin to the stunted whelps that had been born in the Targaryen line from time to time? He prayed to the old gods for guidance. He spent more nights checking the egg, noticing subtle changes. The shell grew faintly slick to the touch, as if covered in hoarfrost. One night, he found a pale exhalation of mist near the egg, as though it breathed in the crypt's cold air. Fear mingled with excitement in his heart. He was no Targaryen. He knew nothing of how to hatch a dragon. But each day he felt the presence of the egg resonate more strongly, stirring some primal sense of wonder within him. The moment of hatching came without warning in the darkest hour before dawn. Ned had been asleep, tossing and turning with uneasy dreams of wolves howling in the snow. Then a distant keening sound pulled him awake. Not quite a howl, not quite a shriek, but something between. The hair on his arms stood on end. The sound faded, then returned, low and rhythmic like the whimper of a newborn pup. Something inside him knew, the egg. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Caitlin, and took a torch to the crypts. He found the egg gleaming with unearthly light in the darkness, frost-laden swirls covering the shell. Its silver-white surface was laced with fine cracks that pulsed faintly. The mewling sound came from inside. Carefully, Ned set down the torch and approached. A pale mist swirled around the egg as though the crypt itself had filled with a ghostly breath. He knelt, heart pounding like a drum in his ears. Then, with a crisp crack that echoed among the statues of ancient Stark kings, a piece of the shell broke away. A tiny muzzle, white as new snow, poked out. Cold vapor hissed from it. The egg split further, and Ned found himself face to face with a creature he had never thought to behold, a hatchling dragon, or so it seemed, yet it was wreathed in cold. Its scales were milky white, shot through with silver and faint lines of pale blue. Eyes like polished ice glowed with a weird luminescence, and when it opened its mouth, it exhaled a plume of cold, not fire. Ned's breath caught in his throat. The hatchling gazed at him for a long moment, swaying unsteadily on its hind legs. Then it let out a soft, warbling cry. Without understanding why, Ned reached out his hand, ignoring the biting chill that radiated from the creature. Its tiny snout brushed against his palm, and he felt a nipping cold that bordered on pain. Yet there was something almost tender in that contact, as though the hatchling recognized him. Slowly, it folded its wings, which were translucent membranes that sparkled like frost in the torchlight, and nestled closer. He wondered if he should fetch Maester Lewin right away. But he dared not tear himself from this moment. Awe, alarm, and the strangest sense of protectiveness all crashed over him. By the old gods, he murmured. If this truly was an ice dragon, something the maesters insisted was mere legend, then House Stark was about to hold power beyond imagination or danger beyond reckoning. In the days that followed, Ned confided in Lewin and, at last, in Caitlin. His wife was horrified at first to see the small, snake-like creature coiled in a corner of their private solar, resting on a bed of furs. Its presence lowered the temperature of the room. The windows frosted over. But the hatchling was not hostile, at least not to Ned. It hardly ate at first, refusing cooked meat or fish. Only when Ned realized that the creature craved raw meat, fresh from the kill, did it begin to feed. While it was still small, Ned secured a supply of rabbits, pigeons, and even a butchered deer once a week from Winterfell's hunts. The dragon devoured them greedily, exhaling plumes of chill that momentarily froze the blood in midair before it shattered like red crystals. It was a frightful sight, but Ned could not deny a growing fascination. Word spread among the immediate family and the closest of Ned's men. Robb, still a boy, grew wide-eyed with awe when he saw the hatchling. Arya, ever bold, wanted to pet it immediately, earning a sharp yelp from Caitlin. Sansa stood well back, uncertain if she should consider it a monster or a marvel. Bran, full of curiosity, wanted to touch its shimmering scales, but Ned insisted on caution. Only Jon Snow, solemn-eyed, gazed at the creature with quiet wonder and a hint of loneliness, as though he understood being an outsider. Ned feared rumors might escape the castle. He posted loyal guards near the crypts and near the tower room where the hatchling often resided. He warned them all to tell no one. He asked Theon Greyjoy, who was brash and often bored, to keep his mouth shut if he valued his head. The boy swore he would, though Ned could see the excitement dancing in Theon's eyes. Rumors about dragons, after all, could upend the entire realm. Robert Baratheon, now king of the Seven Kingdoms, despised any vestige of Targaryen power. He might well order the creature destroyed if he learned of it. Ned did not want to test Robert's mercy. Even more sinister would be if the Lannisters got wind of it. Days turned to weeks, and the hatchling, which Ned named Frostfire in a private moment of wistful irony, grew at a startling pace. Its appetite multiplied. Soon, it was devouring small goats, leaving behind shards of frozen bone. With each meal, Frostfire's strength increased, and it began to move about the corridors at night, trailing a thin fog. Servants whispered of ghosts in the halls. Ned worried constantly about discovery, yet Frostfire seemed to have a bond with him. When Ned was near, the dragon would calm and rest. Sometimes, Ned swore it was reading his emotions. He felt none of the savage unpredictability that men attributed to Targaryen dragons in old tales. Frostfire was cold, yes, as though the essence of winter pulsed in its heart, but it also displayed a fierce loyalty, chiefly to Ned, but extending tenuously to the rest of House Stark, so long as Ned was there to supervise. One bitter cold night, a frantic barking alerted him. He rushed outside to find Ghost, Jon's albino direwolf pup, standing near the godswood. There, half-shrouded in swirling snow, stood Frostfire, wings spread wide, almost the size of a small horse now. Its eyes glowed in the moonlight, and thin streams of icy breath coiled around it. But it was not alone. Before it stood a second shape, another small, glimmering figure, stirring in the snowy gloom. Ned's breath caught. He approached slowly, heart hammering. He realized that somehow, impossibly, Frostfire had laid an egg, or perhaps had found another hidden in the crypts that Ned had overlooked, and it had hatched. This new hatchling was smaller, shimmering in the moonlight with paler scales. Ned was astonished, for he had assumed Frostfire to be male, though in truth, Targaryen records suggested dragons could change sex or were not strictly bound by such distinctions. Yet here was another living proof that these creatures were not some one-off curiosity but a new line of ice dragons. The moment he stepped into the clearing, Frostfire let out a soft croon, as if beckoning him closer. Ned felt the temperature drop around them, the dampness in his beard turning to tiny crystals. The new hatchling hissed once, uncertain, but Frostfire's reassuring presence seemed to calm it. Carefully, Ned reached out a hand. The hatchling regarded him with icy blue eyes, flicked its spiny tail, then rubbed its snout against his palm. Once again, Ned felt that strange mixture of pain and cold, but also an odd sense of belonging. He was no dragon lord, but the creatures seemed to have accepted him as their caretaker. In the days that followed, more eggs were discovered, hidden in a corner of the gods wood near where Frostfire often roost. Ned realized that somehow the presence of winter, the aura of the old gods, or the unique nature of these dragons had spurred a rapid breeding cycle. He couldn't be certain. Maester Luwin was at a loss to explain it, for no living maester had ever studied an ice dragon, assuming they even existed. But there they were, pale eggs that bore the same swirling silver patterns as the origin. One by one they began to crack and hatch, each birth accompanied by a flurry of cold winds and swirling snow. It was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Soon, Ned had not one, not two, but half a dozen newborn ice dragons to tend to, each no larger than a hound, squeaking and hungry. Caitlyn's horror gave way to a resigned acceptance. She recognized that the dragons were now integral to House Stark's future, for good or ill. She insisted that they be contained as best as possible for the safety of the children and the castle. Ned agreed, though keeping them contained was another matter. They thrived in the cold, so Ned arranged for them to reside in a deep and used cellar chamber that was colder than the main keep. He had the chamber reinforced with iron bars and thick walls, though he doubted it would hold them forever as they grew. Yet as the weeks passed, something changed in the castle itself. A sharper chill lingered in the corridors and an unseasonable frost settled over the courtyard each morning. The presence of the ice dragons seemed to beckon winter's breath even though the season had not officially turned. The weirwood leaves in the godwood remained red, but a hoary rime clung to their edges. Guards muttered about restless spirits. Ned sensed a growing tension among his people. They were loyal to House Stark, but the unnatural aura around the keep unsettled them. He knew that secrecy would not last much longer. Already, ravens arrived from King's Landing with news that men whispered of dire omens in the north, farmers complaining of frost creeping into their fields too early, travelers claiming to have seen a great white serpent gliding across the moonlit sky. The king wanted Ned's counsel. Worse still, word had reached them that Queen Cersei was urging Robert to investigate these rumors of monstrous creatures in the north, presumably to quell any potential threat to the throne. Ned resolved to speak to Robert personally. Perhaps old friendship would stay the king's hand from any hasty, violent act. "I must go to King's Landing," he told Catelyn one evening. "The king must hear the truth from me, not from rumor. I owe him that much. And I owe these creatures a chance to live." Catelyn's expression was grim. "And if Robert decides they must die?" Ned set his jaw. "Then I will do all I can to protect them. The north has always been our burden, but perhaps it can be our strength. These dragons, ice dragons, if that's what they truly are, may one day defend the realm. The cold winds are rising, Cat. I feel it in my bones. When winter comes for real, we'll need every advantage we can muster." And so he prepared for the journey, though in his absence, the question remained, how to keep the dragons from rampaging or from being discovered by those who might exploit them. He entrusted Robb and Maester Luwin with overseeing their care, warning them both to exercise the utmost caution. Frostfire, the largest of the brood, was already the size of a small warhorse and had taken to hunting in the woods beyond the castle walls. Ned had cautioned the huntsman never to harm the pale beast, and so far, Frostfire seemed content to hunt deer or even the occasional wild boar. But it was only a matter of time before some frightened villager panicked and called for help. The night before Ned's planned departure, he walked alone in the courtyard where the ground crunched under a thin crust of ice. He gazed up at the battlements and saw the faint silhouette of Frostfire perched on a parapet, tail coiled around a merlin, luminous eyes scanning the star-filled sky. The dragon looked majestic, otherworldly, and Ned felt a profound sense of responsibility. He knelt and touched the frozen earth, recalling the words of the Stark motto, "Winter is coming." The old fear of the unknown pressed on his mind, but so too did a fierce resolve. These creatures were part of House Stark now, and he would not let them be destroyed by the ignorance or hatred of others. The journey south was fraught with tension. Ned traveled with a small guard, carrying only discreet references to the creatures in a set of sealed letters. He had debated bringing a hatchling to prove his words, but decided against it. Transporting such a thing in the heat of the southern lands might harm it, and it would certainly draw attention. Instead, he trusted Robert might still heed the voice of his old friend. But traveling through the neck and into the riverlands took time, and with each mile, Ned feared that the situation back home would worsen or that he might arrive at court too late. The air grew warmer the closer he got to King's Landing, and he felt the swirl of politics pressing upon him like a suffocating hand. When he arrived, he found the capital abuzz with rumors of dragons in the north, though few believed them. Many dismissed the talk as folly or ghost stories. Robert, however, greeted Ned with a boisterous laugh, half amused, half suspicious. In private, the king pounded Ned on the back and demanded to know the truth. "Gods be good, Ned, if there's a dragon in your yard, I want to know about it. I'll mount the damned thing and ride it if I have to." He bellowed with laughter, but beneath that laughter, Ned sensed an undercurrent of tension. Ned chose his words carefully, explaining that certain unusual creatures had been discovered in the north, possibly related to dragons, but different, attuned to the cold. He emphasized that they were still young, no threat to the throne, and that House Stark was taking every precaution. Robert's brow furrowed, and he slammed a cup of ale down. "Hells, Ned, you know how the realm feels about Targaryen nonsense. Even rumors of a single dragon might spark panic. And the Lannisters, well, you know how Cersei thinks. She'll want them dead. She'll say they threatened Tommen and Myrcella or some such." Ned nodded gravely. "I feared as much, my liege. But these are not Targaryen dragons. They are something else entirely. Let them live in the north. They will not disturb your rule. If anything, they might be a shield when the true cold winds come. You once told me you trusted my judgment, I beg you now, trust it again. Robert studied Ned's face for a long moment, then let out a weary sigh. 7 hells, you always did have a knack for turning my head around. Fine. Keep your blasted cold lizards, if that's what they are. But keep them in the north, Ned. Keep them out of sight. The realm can't know. If word spreads too far, the small folk will panic, or worse, some fool like Tywin might decide to march north and put them to the sword. A spark of relief burned in Ned's chest. Thank you, Robert, he said, bowing his head. You have my word that they will remain in the north, far from the eyes of those who would misuse them. So the official policy became a silent conspiracy. Robert would deny rumors of dragons if asked. Ned would ensure the creatures stayed hidden and under control. For a time, at least, House Stark had royal permission to keep these wonders alive. But Ned knew that precarious alliances often turned on a knife's edge. King's Landing was rife with intrigues. Littlefinger smirked in the shadows, Varys whispered half-truths in the corridors, and Cersei's green eyes watched Ned with distrust. He had to tread lightly. Word eventually reached him that trouble brewed near Winterfell. His steward's letters described sightings of frostfire in neighboring villages carrying off sheep. The local small folk were terrified, complaining to their lords. Though the Umbers and the Cerwyns tried to downplay the tales, some men had begun to whisper that House Stark harbored a beast in secret. Meanwhile, the other ice dragons were growing rapidly as well. They breathed cold so potent it could freeze a man's flesh in an instant, yet they remained strangely docile around Ned's family and a handful of trusted guards. Summer was creeping into the rest of Westeros, but in Winterfell's vicinity an uncanny chill persisted, as if the dragons bent the climate to their nature. When Ned finally returned home, he found the courtyard half covered in ice. Frostfire, now the size of 2 warhorses, perched atop the great keep's roof, his pale hide blending eerily with the sky. The rest of the brood, 5 strong, roost in the old training yard, where they had formed a nest of frozen timbers. Robb and Jon stood at a safe distance, watching them wrestle and nip at each other with playful aggression. Ned approached with both trepidation and relief. Frostfire recognized him instantly, letting out a deep-throated growl that echoed across the yard. A swirl of snow rose in the dragon's wake, ruffling Ned's cloak. For a moment, Ned placed a hand on Frostfire's flank, feeling the cold seep through his glove. He murmured a greeting, and the dragon's growl subsided to a rumble. The other dragons lifted their heads, eyes gleaming like shards of ice. In that moment, Ned felt an overwhelming surge of responsibility. He had pledged to Robert that these creatures would pose no threat to the realm. But how could he truly control them, especially if they continued to grow at this alarming rate? Days bled into weeks, then months, and the dragons thrived. With each passing day, they soared farther from Winterfell, hunting in the wildwoods, sometimes even near the lonely hills or beyond the White Knife. They left behind trails of frost, and some travelers reported glimpsing winged silhouettes against the moon, describing them as pale nightmares. Yet the local small folk were gradually, if grudgingly, taught by House Stark's men that these creatures, though fearsome, would not harm them if unprovoked. Instead, the dragons feasted on game from the sprawling forests, rarely venturing into livestock herds unless prey was scarce. Over time, Ned noted another development: the dragons were beginning to exhibit a hive-like social structure, with Frostfire at the top. If one of the others strayed too far or acted aggressively toward a Stark retainer, Frostfire would hiss and flap his enormous wings, driving the offending dragon away. In this manner, Frostfire served as a strange guardian, ensuring that House Stark remained safe. Robb began calling them the Winter Pack, for they seemed not unlike dire wolves in their loyalty. Yet Ned could not shake the sense of looming disaster. The realm's eyes would not remain blind forever. The Lannisters, the Freys, the Greyjoys, any house with ambition might see these dragons as either a threat or a prize. Ned worried about the day when a southern army might appear at the neck, demanding the extinction of the ice dragons. He prayed that Robert's word would hold them at bay, at least for a time. But kings died, alliances shifted, and Ned refused to be naive. An early winter set in, months before it was expected, blanketing the north in thick snow. Some maesters claimed the presence of the dragons was to blame, that they somehow coaxed winter to come early or more fiercely. Regardless, Winterfell hunkered down. Harvests were cut short, and Ned had to organize shipments of grain from White Harbor to feed his people. Yet the dragons seemed to revel in the cold. They grew even larger, their wingspans now so vast that their shadows could eclipse an entire field. With a primal majesty, they soared above the battlements, leaving trails of snow swirling in their wake. During a particularly brutal storm, Ned found himself standing on the ramparts, wind whipping around him, while Frostfire circled overhead. He wondered, not for the first time, if this was truly a blessing or a curse. The old gods had given House Stark a power that the Targaryens once wielded with fire, but here it was a power of ice. And though Ned believed in duty, family, and honor, he questioned whether mortal men should ever hold such might. Dragons had a way of twisting men's hearts, turning them proud, cruel, or mad. Would these ice dragons be any different? On the day that changed everything, a raven arrived bearing terrible news. King Robert was dead, slain by a boar during a hunt. Ned felt a wave of grief wash over him, remembering their youth, the rebellion, the bond they had shared. But that grief was swiftly followed by dread. With Robert gone, young Joffrey sat the Iron Throne, a boy guided by Cersei and Tywin Lannister's ambitions. Ned knew all too well what that meant for any potential threat to the crown. Rumors of northern dragons would no longer be brushed aside by a friendly king. The new regime would see them as a direct challenge, an abomination that needed to be stamped out. Before long, another raven arrived carrying a terse message. Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell was to come to King's Landing at once, bringing his monstrous charges for inspection by the crown. Ned read the lines over and over. He could almost hear the sneer in Cersei's tone. He had no illusions. The moment the Lannisters laid eyes on these dragons, they would call for their destruction. And if Ned refused, a royal decree, or worse, an army would be dispatched north. War could break out, a war that would set the entire realm ablaze, or freeze it solid, depending on which side triumphed. Ned closed his eyes, thinking of the precarious alliances of the realm's peace. Could he truly risk it all to protect these creatures? They were not ordinary beasts, no one would treat them with mercy in the south. Yet they were also living wonders, fiercely loyal to House Stark, and perhaps they held the key to defending the North if the White Walkers ever returned in force. His mind spun with the enormity of it all. He summoned Robb, Jon, Catelyn, and Maester Luwin to discuss their options. The children looked at him with wide, worried eyes. "We can't just hand them over," Arya burst out, though she was barely old enough to comprehend the intricacies of power. "They'll kill them." King Joffrey would see it as a threat to his rule, Catelyn said quietly, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands. "He will not abide dragons outside his control." Robb, on the verge of manhood, set his jaw. "We should stand firm, father. House Stark bows to no one who would demand the destruction of our loyal creatures." Ned's heart clenched. He admired Robb's courage, but he also knew war would be devastating. The North was strong but scarcely recovered from earlier conflicts. The Lannisters held the throne and the resources of the South. A conflict now could tear the realm apart and claim countless lives. And what if the dragons themselves unleashed devastation in the battle? Would they be unstoppable killing machines, or would the realm unite to destroy them, overshadowing House Stark's cause? Jon Snow, silent until then, spoke softly. "We must protect them. And we must protect our people. Perhaps there is another way." Ned looked at his bastard son, seeing the quiet determination in Jon's eyes. "Speak." Jon suggested that the dragons be hidden further north beyond the wall. It sounded insane at first. But as Jon explained, who would search for them there, in the frozen wastes that few dared tread? The wildlings might see them, but the Seven Kingdoms rarely took heed of what happened beyond the wall so long as it didn't threaten them directly. Perhaps in the uncharted lands of eternal ice, the dragons could live free, far from the Lannisters' swords. House Stark could keep watch, ensure the dragons remain an asset if the true cold threat ever came from the lands of always winter. Ned considered the plan with care. Hiding them beyond the wall would be perilous. The Night's Watch might not approve, but if Ned could gain the cooperation of Lord Commander Mormont, perhaps it could be managed quietly. It was certainly better than dragging the dragons south to King's Landing. There, they would surely meet a fiery end. In the end, Ned decided this was the best chance to avert war and spare the dragons. He would feign obedience, send a raven to the capital stating that Winterfell would comply with the summons, but that it would take time to prepare for travel. Meanwhile, under cover of darkness, he would send the dragons north, escorted by a chosen few who understood the stakes. When the day arrived that the realm truly needed them, House Stark would know where to find them. And so, on a moonless night, the plan went into motion. A select group of Stark men, along with Robb, Jon, and a handful of trusted guides, led the great ice dragons through the Wolfswood, then eastward to the King's Road that wound toward Castle Black. The dragons, surprisingly, followed Frostfire's lead, gliding through the night sky in silent formation. The cold aura they exuded sharpened the winter air, but they took care not to fly too high or cause panic in any watchtowers they passed. The watchers on the wall had never seen such a sight. But by arrangement, Jeor Mormont, the old bear, was waiting. He had read Ned's secret letter and, though astounded, saw the strategic value in harboring these creatures if the threats from the far north were truly stirring. Quietly, they guided the dragons through a hidden gate, a small sally port rarely used. The ice dragons entered the realm beyond the wall, a land of deep forests, frozen rivers, and vast tundras that only the free folk roamed. Robb accompanied them for the first day's journey, but Ned insisted he return to Winterfell afterward. Jon, however, chose to go further, volunteering to watch over them for a time. Perhaps Ned thought it was his bastard son's destiny to walk in the cold to safeguard these creatures until the day they would be needed. Jon's bond with Ghost, his albino direwolf, seemed to mirror the bond Ned had forged with Frostfire. Though it tore at Ned's heart to part with them, he knew it was necessary. The brood would be safer beyond the wall, among the glaciers and silent wastes. There, they could grow to their full might without the constant risk of southern assassins or watchers. It might be years or never before they were called upon again. But House Stark would keep their secret, generation after generation, passing down the knowledge of where the ice dragons roost. If the White Walkers ever marched south, if the realm needed a power to match an enemy born of ice, then perhaps these dragons would prove the realm's salvation, or at least the North's bulwark. In the aftermath, Cersei's demands went unanswered, for when the Lannisters sent envoys to Winterfell, they found no monstrous beasts, only rumors and half-eaten goat carcasses in the forest. The envoys saw no sign of the dragons themselves. Ned feigned ignorance, claiming that the beasts, if they ever truly existed, had vanished into the wilds. Furious, the Queen Regent threatened dire consequences for this deception, but the North was vast and unyielding, and no one could produce tangible evidence that House Stark still possessed the creatures. Gradually, other matters occupied the crown: wars in the south, rebellions in the Riverlands. Yet men continued to whisper, in taverns and by their hearths, of pale dragons glimpsed on moonlit nights far beyond the wall. They told of swirling snowstorms that heralded the beasts' passing, of icy roars that echoed across desolate valleys. The free folk, it was said, sometimes spoke of a frost king or a snow wyrm that soared among the peaks. But these were distant tales, as intangible as the northern lights. Few knights or lords dared venture into that harsh land in search of the truth. And so, under Ned Stark's guidance, the legend of the ice dragons was woven into the tapestry of the North, another secret kept by the Starks for the good of the realm. Time slipped by. Winters came and went. The iron scales of war turned in Westeros, alliances rising and falling. But key memory of those dragons, hatched from a stolen Valyrian egg and nurtured in Winterfell's crypts, remained a silent testament to the North's hidden might. As the years passed, Frostfire grew to gargantuan size. The stories told by wandering free folk became more harrowing. Tales of a colossal white dragon that dwarfed even the largest mammoths, with eyes that shone like twin moons. Some said it could freeze entire lakes with a single breath, then shatter them with a swing of its tail. Others claimed they heard its roar in the darkest night, like a thunder that shook the frosty heavens. Yet the creature was rarely aggressive unless threatened. It seemed content to rule its icy domain, accompanied by its smaller kin, each a marvel of living winter. Jon Snow, in a rare message sent via a brave Night's Watch ranger, relayed that the dragons appeared to be thriving, each forging its own territory. A precarious harmony existed among them, with Frostfire as the apex, a father and mother both to the brood. From time to time, Ned would wander the godswood and wonder if he had done right by them. He recalled the day he first cradled that cold, silver-flecked egg in his hands, half doubting the possibility of hatching. Now, an entire lineage of winter-bound dragons had sprung from that act of faith. He thought of what Robert would have said if he had lived to see them. Would he have bellowed with laughter at the sheer madness of it? Or would he have recognized their potential for the realm's defense? Perhaps a bit of both. In his private heart, Ned felt a glimmer of pride. House Stark had reclaimed something stolen from Valyria's ashes, transforming it into a bulwark of the North. And though the realm might fear or scorn these creatures, one day they might prove vital. For if the legends of the Long Night and the White Walkers were indeed more than old wives' tales, if the day came when the undead marched across the winterlocked land, then an ice dragon, or a brood of them, might well tip the balance of survival in favor of the living. In quiet moments, Ned also pondered the cost. War might still come if the secret was ever fully revealed. The Lannisters did not forget slights easily. Joffrey sat the throne, prone to cruelty and rash decisions. If at any point he felt threatened by talk of northern dragons, He might send an army or hire sellswords to burn the north. The years to come would be fraught with uncertainty. But Ned took solace in the knowledge that, for now, the dragons were beyond the wall, free in a land as cold and untamed as they. The crown's reach barely extended so far, and the punishing snows would deter most would-be hunters. And so, the north settled into a tense peace, overshadowed by the presence of these magnificent, frigid beasts that House Stark shielded from southern wrath. Whispers of ice drakes circulated among the common folk. Some even claimed that Ned Stark had bargained with the old gods, trading warm blood for cold power. Others said that the Starks had always been close to the mysteries of the North and that the dire wolves and ice dragons were kin to them in spirit. The truth lived only in Ned's heart and in the eyes of those who had stood face to face with Frostfire and felt the cold wind of its breath. On nights when the auroras danced across the northern sky, Ned would stand atop Winterfell's ramparts, gazing into the darkness. Sometimes he imagined he saw distant silhouettes, winged forms weaving among the clouds. He would remember the hatchling pressing its snout to his hand, the surge of wonder and terror in that moment. He felt a pang, missing them, missing the simpler times before destiny placed such a burden in his hands. But his heart swelled with a fierce protectiveness. He would guard their secret until his last breath, for the sake of the North and all he held dear. And so life continued, and the brood thrived in the shadowed valleys of the land of always winter. Ned Stark remained warden of the North, father, husband, protector of his people, and silent steward of a power older than the Targaryens, colder than the darkest winter night. Tales would one day be told of the Stark who hatched an ice dragon and sired a brood that soared beyond the wall. Songs would be sung in the halls of the free folk who watched silver-white wings eclipse the moon in silent majesty. And the line of the ice dragons endured, forging a bond with the legacy of House Stark unlike any in the Seven Kingdoms. In the end, whether for war or for wonder, the stolen egg from Valyria had found its rightful place in the North's cold embrace, nurtured by a Stark's steady hand, forging a legend that would outlast the fleeting crowns of mortal kings. And in that union of frost and duty, the seeds were sown for an age when winter's fury would not be faced by men alone, but by the primal might of creatures shaped by the same chill that defined the North. If the white winds of the others came howling out of the darkest night, House Stark's dragons would be there, an icy flame in the heart of winter, burning cold and bright, answering the old god's call to protect the living. Ned Stark stood upon the ramparts of Winterfell long after the others had gone to their beds, gazing at the moonlit sky as wisps of cloud traveled across the face of the pale moon. Wind ruffled the fur lining his cloak, and though the courtyard below was quiet, memories clamored in his mind, images of the ice dragons flying under the moonlight, the swirl of snow in their wake, the chill that permeated the air wherever they went. The brood was gone now, carried beyond the wall with Jon Snow and a small band of watchers. By all sensible accounts, Ned should have felt relief that his castle no longer housed living proof of something so dangerous. But in the hush of night, he felt only the weight of a secret that continued to shape his every choice. Sleep would not come easily these days, for the news out of King's Landing grew bleaker with each raven. With Robert Baratheon dead, the boy King Joffrey sat the Iron Throne. The realm had begun to slide into chaos more quickly than even Ned had feared. The Riverlands were aflame with conflict. Some whispered of Tywin Lannister's forces harrying the smaller houses that refused to bow meekly. Meanwhile, Renly Baratheon had declared himself king in Highgarden, while Stannis Baratheon at Dragonstone also laid claim to the throne. Rumors spun in all directions, and it seemed every corner of Westeros might soon be at war. Ned had no taste for further bloodshed. He remembered the horrors of Robert's rebellion, the immeasurable cost in lives and tears. But if war came to his doorstep, House Stark would not be able to hide behind the snows. The North was vast but not impenetrable, and the knowledge of the ice dragons, though still whispered in rumor, might give both enemies and would-be allies reason to march upon Winterfell. The memory of how quickly the Targaryens had forged the Seven Kingdoms under Dragonfire lingered in men's hearts. If the North commanded a new breed of dragons, then in the minds of Southern lords Ned Stark must either be taken as an ally or destroyed outright. He sighed into the cold wind, turning away from the parapet. Perhaps in due time the realm would forget the rumors of winter dragons altogether. Already the Lannisters had sent envoys that found nothing definitive. The few bits of evidence, frozen tracks, stories from frightened smallfolk, were easily denied as superstitious nonsense. Ned had done his part well, feigning confusion and dismay at the very idea. But the Lannisters were no fools. They would keep watch, and if ever an opportunity arose to use those rumors against him, they would seize it without hesitation. He quietly descended the winding stone steps into the courtyard. Moonlight washed the flagstones in silver. A ghostly hush filled Winterfell at this hour. The gatehouse was manned by only a handful of loyal guards, men who had sworn to keep the secret of what had once roamed the castle's corners. The direwolves Grey Wind, Lady, Nymeria, Summer, Shaggy Dog, and Ghost were mostly asleep in various corners of the grounds. Ghost was gone with Jon, but the others remained, grown larger and fiercer than pups but not yet at their full might. Robb had begun training with Grey Wind by his side, forging a bond not unlike the one Ned had felt with Frostfire. When father and son trained in the yard, Ned sometimes caught the old guard smiling. There was an echo of days long past in the image of a Stark with a powerful companion, though no one quite dared to mention the dragons. He left the courtyard behind and made his way into the Great Keep. The corridors were dimly lit by guttering torches. At last, he arrived at his solar, stepping inside quietly, mindful that others might be resting. To his surprise, he found Catelyn awake, seated by a small fire that looked ready to sputter out. She turned at his entrance, her eyes glistening in the faint glow. "You should sleep," she said softly. "Tomorrow the ravens must be answered, and you will have enough troubles to weigh upon you." "I know," he murmured, removing his cloak and draping it across a nearby chair. He took a seat beside her, noting the worry lines etched into her face. "But I wanted a moment's peace to think." She nodded, then reached out to lay her hand over his. They sat for a time, saying little, simply drawing on each other's presence in the hush. At length, Catelyn asked, "Do you truly believe the realm will tear itself apart so quickly? After everything, perhaps we can stand apart from it, as the North sometimes does." Ned was silent, recalling the dealings at King's Landing, the cunning of men like Peter Baelish and Varys, the brazen cruelty of Joffrey, and the pride of Tywin Lannister. "I wish we could remain above it all," he said at last. "But the Lannisters will not let the North stand idle. So long as they suspect we hold a threat to their rule, they will push. And with the realm fracturing, each side will want to secure the North, or at least ensure we don't rise in arms against them. War rarely spares those who wish to avoid it." Catelyn lowered her gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "The children, if it comes to open conflict, what will become of them? If the fighting spreads?" His heart twisted. "I will protect them," he said, and though his tone was gentle, there was steel in it. "I won't allow them to be used as pawns or worse." She pressed her lips together and nodded, but Ned could see the fear in her eyes. He feared the same. Lives upended, families broken, all for ambitions that belonged mostly in the South. There was no easy path through the storm. For now, the best they could do was remain vigilant, quietly gather their bannermen, and be ready for any move by the Lannisters or Baratheon pretenders. They would need to watch the roads carefully, ensure White Harbor was fortified, and confirm the loyalty of the lords in the north. In dark corners of his mind, Ned even wondered if the dragons themselves, exiled beyond the wall, might one day be called upon to tilt the balance. But a part of him still feared unleashing them in war. Their power was too great, too unpredictable. They belonged to the wild ice of the far north, a realm as harsh and ancient as time itself. In the morning, Ned gathered Maester Luwin, Robb, and several of his trusted bannermen, Roose Bolton, Wyman Manderly, Galbart Glover, and others. They assembled in the great hall, where the hearth fires blazed against the chill that never seemed to fully leave Winterfell anymore, despite the official onset of what should have been warmer months. Outside, the sun shone weakly on frosted grounds. Ned sometimes wondered if the presence of the dragons for all those months had shifted something fundamental in the castle's weather, as though Winterfell itself clung to a deeper cold. He stood at the head of the table, the direwolf sigils watching from tapestries on the walls. The lords and knights regarded him with keen interest. Some were older men who had stood beside him during Robert's rebellion, others younger, eager to prove themselves. Roose Bolton's pale eyes gave little away. Wyman Manderly, massive and broad, drummed his fingers on the table. They all waited for Ned to speak. "News from King's Landing is grim," Ned began in a calm tone that belied his inward tension. "We all know King Robert has died. Joffrey Baratheon sits the throne, advised by the Lannisters. Yet there are rumors that Joffrey may not be Robert's true son. Renly Baratheon claims the crown, as does Stannis. The realm fractures. I would spare the North from bloodshed if I could, but we must be prepared for any attempt by the Lannisters to strong-arm us into bending the knee. He paused, scanning the room. I will not pledge the North to any claimant blindly. Nor will I allow the Lannisters free rein here. If the Southern Lords want to tear each other apart over the Iron Throne, so be it, but we will guard our borders. We must ensure every holdfast is provisioned. The night may come when we are forced to stand alone. A low murmur spread among the men. Lord Glover asked if Ned planned to raise the Stark banners in open rebellion. Ned shook his head. Not unless we are left no choice. For now, we watch, we wait. The Lannisters have demanded answers about rumored beasts in the north. We have nothing to show them, for there are no dragons in Winterfell. His eyes flicked meaningfully around the table. That partial truth sat heavy in the air. No one spoke of the ice dragons openly, but each man who had glimpsed them or heard the tales knew this was no mere rumor. We will keep silent. And if any forces approach our borders, we respond with caution but readiness. Roose Bolton's voice slithered through the hush. What if they send an army to demand your presence, Lord Stark? Or that of your children, as hostages to keep the North docile? A chill brushed Ned's spine. He forced his voice to remain steady. They will find the North is not so easily cowed. My children are here, under my protection. The Lannisters have no legitimate claim to them. Hostages or no, I will not sacrifice my family's safety. His gaze swept the assembly. They nodded in agreement, some more fervently than others. The North had endured many trials and seldom bent the knee happily. Ned sensed their loyalty, but also their worry. The memory of the dragons, though never named, hovered at the edges of their thoughts, an unspoken question. What if those creatures could tip the scales in the event of an invasion? Would they remain beyond the wall, or would Ned call them back? He offered no answers. The meeting broke with the lords dispersing to carry out orders, bolstering their holds, increasing patrols, and discreetly preparing for siege if it came to that. As they left, Maester Luwin lingered at Ned's side, his hands clasped around a bundle of letters. My lord, there is another matter, the Maester said quietly. We have heard from Jon Snow through the Night's Watch. He sends word that the brood is thriving. But Luwin's voice dropped even lower. He also says they have detected signs of wights. Rangers have found corpses that do not stay dead, glimpses of pale figures in the snow. The watch is unsettled. Ned clenched his jaw. The White Walkers? He could barely say the words. Old stories spoke of them, inhuman beings of ice that brought an endless night. Most thought them legends. Yet those same legends had dismissed ice dragons. Do we have proof? No conclusive proof, Luwin admitted, but the Rangers swear these sightings are real. Jon asks if the brood might help patrol. He's uncertain if the creatures would heed him if the others truly come. But he's desperate. Ned closed his eyes, memories of half-forgotten bedtime tales swirling in his mind. The long night, the war for the dawn, the Night King, he had always believed these to be myths or, at best, warnings from a more superstitious time. But the older he grew, the more he realized that behind many myths lay kernels of truth. Ice dragons had proven that well enough. Could the White Walkers indeed be stirring after thousands of years? And if so, how could men hope to stand against them without a power of their own? He told Luwin to keep him apprised of every raven that came from the wall. Secretly, he resolved that if the threat was real, he might have no choice but to risk calling upon Frostfire and the brood for the realm's defense. The idea chilled him more than the winter wind. If the dragons descended once more into the inhabited north, the Lannisters and all the realm would know. War would become inevitable. But if the alternative was a tide of undead sweeping down unchallenged, the cost of secrecy would be too high. Days melted into weeks, and the tensions in the south escalated. Robb Stark came into Ned's solar one afternoon, looking grim. He had a letter from Riverrun. Catelyn's father, Hoster Tully, was gravely ill, and the Riverlands were being ravaged by Gregor Clegane, supposedly at Tywin Lannister's command. Mother wants to ride south to see her father, Robb said. But is it safe? The Lannisters seem to be picking fights with any who shelter opponents of the crown. Ned weighed the question. Your grandfather may not have much time left. Your mother will wish to be by his side, and I cannot blame her. The question is whether the Lannisters would dare harm her if she travels under a flag of truce. They're not known for their mercy, especially if they suspect we're harboring secrets, Robb said, then hesitated before adding in a quieter voice. Secrets like? Ned held up a hand. We do not speak of them, not here, not anywhere. He glanced around the solar as if expecting a hidden spy. In any case, the Lannisters can suspect all they want. They have no proof. Robb pressed on. Father, would it be wise to let Mother go alone? Perhaps I could escort her with a strong guard. Ned considered his son. Robb was on the cusp of manhood, a tall youth who carried himself with quiet confidence, a reflection of his upbringing in the north. You could, but that would leave Winterfell more vulnerable. And it might be seen as a provocative move if you march south with an armed host. We want to avoid open conflict until we have no choice. Then what do we do? Ned laid a hand on Robb's shoulder. We do what Starks have always done. We endure, we prepare, and we protect our own. I will send a message to your mother advising caution. Perhaps she can slip south with a small escort, avoiding the King's Road. Or perhaps we can invite Lord Hoster to come north if his health allows it. He knew that last idea was more a polite gesture than a real solution. Hoster Tully was too ill to travel far. Let us see what your mother believes is best. He sensed the frustration in Robb, the boy's desire to do something. Ned remembered that restlessness at Robb's age, wanting to leap into danger for the sake of family and honor. But the times demanded caution. The Lannisters were cunning, and if rumor leaked that the North possessed monstrous cold-breathing creatures, they might well send their entire southern might to crush House Stark. As if summoned by Ned's worries, a raven arrived a day later bearing the royal seal. The message was curt but chilling. Queen Regent Cersei demanded that Ned travel at once to King's Landing to swear loyalty to King Joffrey, or else face charges of treason. She cited a litany of half-truths, that Ned had refused previous summonses, that his loyalty was uncertain since the rumors of unnatural beasts, that the Riverlands claimed the Starks might be raising an army. The final lines threatened that if he did not appear, the crown would name him traitor and war would be declared on the north. Ned crushed the parchment in his fist, feeling anger kindle behind his ribcage. He had served as Hand of the King under Robert, had fought for the realm's stability. Now this child king and his mother presumed to brand him a traitor. His first instinct was to tear the letter to shreds, but he forced himself to breathe. Anger would not serve him. He needed clarity. He gathered the household once more, Maester Luwin, Robb, his bannermen. This time, Catelyn was present, having decided not to ride south yet in light of the dangers. The hall was quieter than before, tension thrumming in every corner. Ned read the letter aloud. A few men cursed. Robb bristled at the threat. Catelyn's face hardened, the worry shone behind her composure. We cannot ignore this, Ned said when the uproar faded. If we refuse to go, they will make good on their threat. But if I journey to King's Landing, I may be imprisoned or worse. I remember too well what happened to the last men who opposed Cersei and her brood. He did not need to speak the name of the murdered children of Rhaegar Targaryen or the fate of other enemies who had crossed Tywin Lannister's path. Let me go in your stead, said Roose Bolton, his voice smooth as a blade. I could speak on your behalf at court and negotiate terms. Ned considered him. Bolton was a formidable man, but hardly one known for stirring trust or good faith. The Lannisters might view him with suspicion, or worse, Bolton might seize the chance to curry favor for himself. I appreciate the offer, my lord, but the Lannisters specifically demanded me. They want the Warden of the North to bend the knee. Catelyn, standing near the dais, pressed her lips together. You have no illusions what will happen if you go alone, she said. They'll throw you in a black cell as soon as you arrive. Or worse, Joffrey might demand your head as proof of the North's submission. Robb inhaled sharply, stepping forward. We can march the northern lords to Moat Cailin and defend the neck. Let the Lannisters come if they dare. We'll make them pay in blood. A cheer went up from some younger knights, but Ned shook his head. That may be a path to war. A war that would bleed the realm with no guarantee of victory. The North is strong, but the Lannisters have the Reach, the Westerlands, and the Crownlands at their beck and call. We would be outnumbered. Even if we could hold them at the neck indefinitely, they might starve the rest of the North by sea. And what of the White Walkers rumored in the far north? If they are truly returning, we cannot afford to be locked in a southern war while the real threat gathers beyond the wall. The hall fell silent, each man weighing the dreadful balance of choices. Ned gazed around at the men who had pledged him their swords. He did not want to send them to their deaths over a fragile boy king's commands. Yet the Lannisters would not give them peace so easily. At last, he said, I will not go blindly. I will send a letter in reply, stating that I will travel south when winter's threat is lessened. I will invoke the old arrangements that allow the Warden of the North to remain during times of dire winter. We'll see how they respond. They'll see it as stalling, said Great John Umber, who had arrived the day before. The Lannisters don't care about the North's winter or our ancient rights. Ned sighed. Perhaps. But it may buy us time. If they grow impatient, they might do something rash, forcing the other great houses to question their methods. At best, we can avoid an immediate conflict. When the meeting concluded, the lords dispersed with wary glances. Robb lingered, frustration evident in every line of his posture. Father, there must come a day when we draw steel and defend ourselves. Ned clasped his son's shoulder. There may indeed come such a day, and sooner than we'd like. But we must be sure we cannot avoid it before we unleash men into battle. War is not a game, Robb. It leaves scars that never truly heal. Robb lowered his gaze. I understand. I only fear that we'll be caught unprepared. We'll prepare quietly, ensuring we have the resources and allies we need if the worst should come. In the following weeks, Ned oversaw a subtle buildup of the North's defenses. He ordered more weapons forged in the castle's smithy. He directed additional patrols along the King's Road to watch for the arrival of any Lannister soldiers or spies. Trade ships traveling up the White Knife were monitored, though White Harbor's Lord, Wyman Manderley, sent word that no suspicious vessels had come thus far. Word also trickled in from the west that Balon Greyjoy was stirring in Pike, possibly considering a new rebellion. Ned shuddered at the thought of yet another front of conflict. All the while, the uneasy hush of deepening cold settled over Winterfell, even though the calendar insisted it should be warmer. One evening, as Ned walked the battlements, he saw a faint shape in the northern sky, something large that wheeled in slow circles before vanishing behind distant clouds. For a moment, his heart leapt, thinking it might be Frostfire, returning from beyond the wall. But the shape did not reappear. Perhaps it was only his imagination, or perhaps a single dragon had drifted south for reasons unknown, drawn by the memory of the place where it hatched. He decided not to speak of it. Let men see or not see as they might. If a dragon was near, it would not remain hidden for long. And if that happened, the precarious quiet would end. Maester Luwin approached Ned the following morning with news. Castle Black had sent another raven, bearing an urgent plea. White Walkers had been sighted by more rangers, and the bodies of several wildlings had been found with strange, ice-rimmed wounds. More ominously, Jeor Mormont wrote that even the presence of the brood, on those rare nights when an ice dragon winged silently over the haunted forest, did not entirely banish the terror. Some whites scattered, but others showed no fear, creeping through the darkness like unstoppable corpses. Mormont begged for more men, more swords, anything that might strengthen the wall's defense. Ned let the parchment slip through his fingers. Perhaps he should have known that mythical creatures alone would not solve an equally mythical threat. The White Walkers, if these sightings were real, were as ancient as the ice dragons, perhaps older, and they possessed a magic that mortal men barely understood. The idea of massing an army of the North to face them pressed against Ned's mind. How could he muster that force when the threat in the south also loomed? If he left the North to help the Watch, the Lannisters might strike Winterfell itself. If he did nothing, the others could slip around the wall in small, deadly groups. A plan began to form in the back of his mind, though he did not fully trust it. The ice dragons needed guidance. Jon Snow was too young, too inexperienced to harness them as Targaryens once did with their fire-breathing beasts. Ned himself had a bond with Frostfire, albeit incomplete. Could that bond extend to controlling or directing them in real battle? It was a fearsome prospect. The last thing he wanted was to become a man who unleashed dragons upon the living. But if the others threatened all of humanity, was that not a cause worthy of every weapon at their disposal? That night, Ned consulted quietly with Catelyn. She listened, her brow furrowed as he explained the gist of the letters from Castle Black. So you're considering traveling beyond the wall yourself? She asked, voice trembling with both concern and a flicker of resolve. If the threat is real, Ned said, then we cannot simply ignore it. And if the brood will only truly respond to me, well, I have to try to ensure they can be rallied to protect the realm. The wall's garrison is too small, the realm is too divided, and the Lannisters are not about to send aid for a threat they do not believe in. She stared into the small fire on the hearth. What of our children? If you go and war erupts with the Lannisters while you're gone. Ned closed his eyes. He thought of Sansa's sweet smiles, of Arya's fierce eyes, of Bran who was learning to climb every wall, Rickon who was too young to understand the swirling dangers, and Robb who was rapidly becoming a man. They will remain here under the protection of the Bannermen. Robb is near grown. He can step up to lead our forces if the Lannisters come. If I do not return, he will become Lord of Winterfell. He swallowed, fighting the knot in his throat. But I must do this. War in the south will seem a trifling thing if the stories of the others are true and they come sweeping down upon us. Catelyn's hand found his. The days when she might have tried to dissuade him from peril were past, replaced by a weary acceptance that the times demanded every sacrifice. You have my blessing, she said softly. But return to us if you can. And if the dragons, if they must be used, do not lose yourself to their power. The Targaryens, she did not finish the thought. They both knew what madness and ambition had done to that bloodline. Ned departed within a fortnight, keeping his purpose known only to a few. He told the northern lords he was visiting the wall to inspect the fortifications, given the rumors of unrest beyond it. He took a small retinue, Jory Castle, the loyal captain of his guard, several seasoned men who had proven their discretion, and 2 maids to attend to personal needs and maintain appearances. He chose not to bring Robb, for the risk was too great. Someone had to remain behind as regent of Winterfell. He did, however, bring Bran, who had begged to see the wall just once. After much agonizing, Ned relented on the condition that Bran remain safely at Castle Black and not journey beyond. Perhaps, Ned reasoned, it was also a chance for Bran to witness the far north and gain perspective on the realm he might one day help govern. The journey was cold but uneventful. At the King's Road forking near the Gift, they saw no sign of Lannister forces. The road was eerily empty, as though travelers sensed the times were dire and stayed in their holdfasts. As they drew closer to the looming height of the wall, Ned felt the old awe stir within him. The colossal sheet of ice towered over them, a testament to ancient magic and the labor of ages past. The gloom of the sky made the wall appear gray-blue, an endless fortress of frozen tears. At Castle Black, Lord Commander Jeor Mormont came forth to greet them, clad in his thick black cloak. Behind him stood Jon Snow, taller than when Ned had last seen him. Jon's eyes lit with shock and relief when he beheld his father and little brother Bran. The boy saluted, as befit his membership in the Night's Watch, though Ned saw the swirl of emotions in his face, a hunger for news of home, sorrow for the distance between them, gratitude that they had come at last. Bran hopped off the horse with a grin, shivering in the cold wind but too excited to show fear. "Jon," he cried, and the 2 brothers embraced. Ned felt a sting in his chest, wishing the circumstances were happier. They all retreated into the common hall for warmth and a meal. Over thick stews and black bread, Jeor Mormont explained the situation. Wildlings were fleeing south in greater numbers, speaking of an undead threat stalking the night. Scouts had vanished, and some had returned as whites, attacking their own brothers with eyes shining blue in the darkness. Jon sat silently, fists clenched, as the old bear recounted these horrors. Ned asked the question that weighed on him, and what of the dragons? Have they helped at all? Jon exhaled, glancing at Mormont, who nodded for him to speak. They do fly along the northern fringes, father, but they come and go as they please. Sometimes I see Frostfire in the distance, leading the brood. I try to approach, but they seldom land near me. They're wary, or perhaps they don't see me as one of their own. If they sense the others or the whites, they occasionally drive them off, but not always. The White Walkers know how to hide from them. We found one white with icicles trailing from its limbs, so cold it seemed a match for the dragons themselves. It took a dozen arrows to bring it down. Ned frowned, remembering how unstoppable even normal whites could be from the tales told. Dragons of fire had once been a potent weapon against the undead. But these were dragons of ice, and the magic that animated whites was intimately tied to the same cold domain. Was it possible that the others could withstand or even subvert the brood's power? The thought was horrifying. He forced himself to remain calm. Then I must see Frostfire myself, if I can. Perhaps he will remember me. If I can coax him to follow, maybe the brood will become more responsive. Mormont nodded gravely. But be wary, Lord Stark. Even if you can bring them to heel for a time, no mortal man truly controls dragons. These are not docile beasts. And beyond the wall, the dangers are legion. Ned cast a glance at Bran, who sat quietly, his eyes wide. He resolved to leave his son safely at Castle Black. He could not risk his life beyond the wall. He told Bran as much later that evening. The boy argued, declaring he was strong enough to go, but Ned's stern tone cut that short. Eventually, Bran relented with a resentful look, though Ned knew it was for the best. At dawn, Ned and his small party ventured through the icy tunnel that cut beneath the wall. On the far side stretched a bleak landscape of pine forests, frozen streams, and rolling hills white with snow. The wind howled constantly. A few scattered wildling camps had been sighted along the horizon, but the Night's Watch escorted Ned's group far enough that they might search for Frostfire in relative safety. Jon rode with them despite the vow that might have kept him at Castle Black. Or Mormont had granted him leave, hoping that Jon could at least help identify any lairs the dragons used. For 2 days they ventured north, glimpsing the occasional ruined camp or shattered bones. Jon explained that some of these places had been visited by the brood, which feasted on deer and elk. At night, Ned thought he heard roars like distant avalanches, though they might have been the moaning of the wind in the high crags. On the 3rd day, they crossed a frozen river and made camp near a sheer cliff that overlooked a valley. The night was bitterly cold. In the small ring of tents, men huddled around fires that seemed inadequate for the darkness pressing in. Jon and Ned spoke quietly at the edge of the firelight, both wearing heavy furs. Ned observed the haunted look in Jon's eyes. The boy had changed. Gone was the brash eagerness he had sometimes shown at Winterfell. In its place was a grim determination tempered by hardships few his age experienced. "Father," Jon said softly, mindful of the men nearby. "Are you certain the realm can be saved? Even if we rally the North, the Lannisters and the rest squabble among themselves. They won't believe in the others until it's too late." Ned placed a gloved hand on Jon's shoulder. "We must try. The living must stand together, or the others will devour us one by one. And if we can bring the brood to our side, if we can find a way to pit ice dragons against these unholy forces, perhaps we have a chance." Jon looked at him carefully. "And what if the dragons are no match? If they share the same element, the others might be able to twist them." "That is my fear," Ned confessed. "But I have to hope that the bond we share with them can break that power. Frostfire's first loyalty was to me. He accepted me from the moment he hatched. I pray that means something still." Jon nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. "If we find them, let me help you. Maybe they sense ghost in me the way Frostfire senses a wolf in you. I don't know. But we can try." They clasped forearms, father and son, forging a quiet solidarity. Despite the cold, Ned felt a flicker of warmth in his chest, proud of the man Jon was becoming. He remembered Robert Baratheon's boisterous dream of riding a dragon into battle. This was not a drunken fancy, it was a sober, desperate hope for the survival of the realm. That night, they slept fitfully. Toward the darkest hours, Ned woke to a soft sound like the crunch of snow underfoot. He sat up, hand on his sword, scanning the shadows. The moon broke through tattered clouds, illuminating a figure standing just beyond the ring of their dying fire. At first, Ned thought it was one of his men, but the height and strange stillness made his blood run cold. He rose slowly, heart hammering. Jon was already awake, reaching for Longclaw. The figure took a single step closer, and moonlight caught the inhuman pallor of its flesh. Its eyes glowed with a cold blue light, a hue that Ned had seen once in the gaze of the ice dragons, but that here carried no warmth of recognition, only a dreadful, otherworldly intelligence. A White Walker. Ned had never seen one in the flesh, but the stories were unmistakable, tall, gaunt, with armor that seemed to shift in color and texture like ice. A twisted blade was strapped across its back, faintly reflecting moonlight. No steam rose from its form, it was as if the cold fed upon it. For a moment Ned could not move, transfixed by the sheer presence of the creature. Then instincts honed in war took over. "To arms," he shouted, voice echoing in the still night. He grabbed the hilt of his sword, though he knew common steel might do little good. Jon already had Longclaw in hand, its Valyrian steel shimmering in the moonlight. The White Walker's lipless mouth curved in a faint mockery of a smile. It let out a sound that crackled like ice shards snapping. Then it rushed forward with inhuman speed. Ned barely had time to raise his weapon. He felt a jarring impact as the creature's unnatural strength slammed into him. He stumbled, and ice-cold fingers raked across his cloak, tearing through fur and cloth as though it were paper. Jon lunged, swinging Longclaw in a deadly arc. The walker pivoted with fluid grace, raising its strange blade. Steel met frost-forged magic. Sparks danced, and a layer of rime crackled over the Valyrian steel. Jon gritted his teeth, thrusting forward with all his might. The White Walker slid back, unnervingly agile. Another blow came, and Jon deflected it, though he nearly lost his footing. Ned found his balance and slashed at the creature's flank. His common steel shattered on contact with the walker's blade, sending shards skittering across the frozen ground. He swore, stumbling back and reaching for a spare dagger. Around them, the Night's Watch men were stirring, grabbing weapons, but fear flickered in their eyes. None had faced a walker at such close range. The walker whirled, slamming Jon's sword aside with eerie precision. Longclaw hissed, coated in frost. For an instant, Ned feared the blade would snap. The creature advanced on Jon, who tried to stand firm, but the walker's strength knocked him off his feet. A triumphant gleam shone in those ice-blue eyes. "No!" Ned roared, surging forward. He hurled himself into the creature, staggering it for half a heartbeat. That was all John needed. He let out a cry and drove Longclaw upward, thrusting into the walker's chest. The blade sank in with a sound like a frozen lake cracking. A shriek tore the night, high and keening as if 1,000 winters howled at once. The walker convulsed, frost peeling from its flesh in fractal patterns. Then it shattered into 1,000,000 shards of ice, dissolving into the snow. Leave. Only a swirl of cold wind. Silence fell, broken only by the labored breathing of the men, their breath steaming in the moonlight. Ned stared at the spot where the walker had stood. A swirl of hoarfrost drifted on the wind, all that remained. His chest heaved, heart pounding. He looked to John, who knelt, gripping Longclaw. The blade was etched with cracks of frost, but it remained intact. Slowly, John got to his feet, face pale. "They're real," one of the Black brothers whispered, terror wide in his eyes. "Gods help us, the White Walkers are real." Ned swallowed, adrenaline surging through him. This single creature had nearly killed them. How many more lurked beyond the wall? The men murmured prayers. Some turned in circles, half expecting more to appear from the gloom. They regrouped quickly, building the fire higher. Ned checked his wound, claws had torn into his cloak and the leather beneath, but his skin was largely unscathed aside from bruises. John's breathing was ragged, but he had no serious injuries beyond a shallow cut on his forearm. One of the watchmen pressed a bandage there, muttering about the unnatural cold that clung to the gash. Ned watched as the swirl of scattered ice shards melted away, leaving behind no trace of the walker's body. Only the faint stench of cold lingers, Ned thought, recalling a line from an ancient text. They did not attempt to sleep again that night. Instead, they stood guard by the fires, scanning the darkness. Dawn came sluggishly, gray and listless. In that ashen light, Ned turned to his men and said, "We must push on. We came to seek the dragons, but now we know the threat is real. We cannot tarry. If the brood is out here, we must find them, or at least Frostfire. A single walker nearly bested us. If an army of them appears, the realm is doomed unless we can gather every advantage." John nodded, exhaustion etched in his features, yet determination shone brighter. "Then let's go. I think I know where we might find them." They extinguished the fires, packed their camp, and set off through the snow-covered forest. John led them toward an area where he had once glimpsed the brood roosting in a frosty gorge. Their progress was slow, ice coated the ground, and the looming pines rattled in a biting wind. The men were tense, scanning every drift and shadow for movement. Occasionally, they found prints, massive clawed tracks that could only belong to the dragons. Some were old, partially filled with fresh snow, others newer, suggesting the creatures were indeed in the vicinity. By midday, they reached the mouth of a ravine with steep walls of black rock. A narrow path led downward, lined with frost-laden bushes. The wind here whistled in eerie echoes as though the gorge itself were sighing. John signaled for caution, dismounting and proceeding on foot. Ned followed suit, heart-thumping. If the dragons were down there, how would they react? Would they still remember Ned or see him as an intruder in their domain? They advanced slowly, the gloom swallowing them. Thin sunlight angled through the top of the ravine, illuminating drifting motes of ice. The smell of raw meat reached them, along with the sharp tang of something indescribably cold. Then they saw them. The brood lay scattered around a large clearing at the bottom of the ravine, half hidden by boulders. Each dragon's scales glimmered white and silver, tinged with faint blues in the dim light. One crunched on the carcass of a musk ox, frozen blood splintering with each bite. Another dozed, tail coiled around a chunk of ice. And in the center, perched upon a rise of rock, lay Frostfire, grown to a size that made Ned's breath catch. Even lying still, the dragon's length was that of 2 longships, with wings that folded along its sides like translucent glaciers. Spines jutted from its neck, and its great head rested on its 4 claws, eyes half-lidded. A ridge of white frost seemed to coat the entire beast, as though a portion of the ravine's ice had come to life. Ned felt a surge of awe and apprehension. It had been many moons since he'd last beheld Frostfire in the flesh. Though he had touched the dragon when it was barely the size of a horse, that bond might be a distant memory now. Carefully, he raised an arm and motioned for the men to hold back. John stood at his shoulder, lips parted in wonder. A quiet rumble echoed through the ravine as one of the smaller dragons, though still immense, noticed their presence. It reared its head, eyes glowing an icy blue, and exhaled a plume of frigid mist. Ned's men gripped their weapons nervously, but Ned held a hand out in a placating gesture. He took a step forward, forcing calm into his posture. Frostfire stirred. The gargantuan dragon lifted its head, nostrils flaring. Its eyes opened fully, revealing those swirling depths of pale blue shot with silver. The pupils narrowed as they fixed upon Ned. An electric charge seemed to pass through the air, stirring the small whirls of drifting snow. Ned's heart hammered so hard he thought it would burst from his chest, but he continued forward. "Frostfire," he said softly, the name echoing in the frozen gorge. The beast's neck rose slowly, frost crackling along its scales. A deep, resonant growl emanated from its throat, reverberating in Ned's bones. The other dragons shifted, some hissing, uncertain of these visitors. But Frostfire did not spring to attack. Instead, the gargantuan head tilted as though trying to place a memory. Ned took another few steps, arms out and unarmed, showing no threat. Jon's presence hovered behind him. The men remained at a distance, eyes wide. Finally, Ned halted perhaps 10 paces away from that colossal snout. Each breath from Frostfire sent a wave of biting cold washing over him, numbing his exposed cheeks. He swallowed, the memory of the hatchling pressing its icy muzzle to his palm surfacing in his mind. Softly he removed a glove, though the cold stung his flesh. He extended his hand, palm outward. "Do you remember me?" he murmured, voice trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. "We once walked the halls of Winterfell together. You were but a hatchling then." For a moment, the dragon's lips curled, revealing teeth like jagged icicles. Frostfire let out a breath that crackled in the air, but it was not an attack, more like an exhalation of recognition. Slowly, the great head bent lower, those luminous eyes narrowing. Ned forced himself to remain absolutely still, though every instinct screamed at him to flee from such an immense predator. The dragon's snout drew close to his outstretched hand. The chill radiating from its scales was intense enough to make Ned's skin feel like it was burning with cold. For a terrible instant, he feared the beast would snap him up in a single bite. But then Frostfire's nostrils flared, inhaling Ned's scent. A low rumble filled the air, and Ned felt a tenuous connection spark, like a memory of old familiarity. He dared to lay his palm against the dragon's scales. The sensation was painfully cold, yet he endured. Behind him, he heard the men exhale in disbelief. Frostfire did not strike. Instead, the dragon's rumble deepened, transforming into a sound that might have been akin to a purr if such a fearsome creature could purr. Ned's breath caught. He closed his eyes, tears prickling at the corners from the sting of the cold. Jon stepped closer, long claw sheathed, hands raised peacefully. He murmured greetings of his own, his breath misting. Frostfire glanced at him, snorting softly. There was no immediate sign of aggression. In the periphery, the other dragons hissed, but they did not swarm or attack. It appeared that so long as Frostfire accepted Ned's presence, the rest would wait and watch. When Ned withdrew his hand, the flesh was red with the chill, his fingertips numb. Still, he felt exhilaration. If Frostfire remembered him, then perhaps all was not lost. He turned to Jon, letting out a shuddering breath. "We have a chance," he said quietly. "He hasn't forgotten." Jon nodded, eyes shining. "What now?" Ned took a moment to steady himself. "Now we see if we can guide them. Or at least persuade Frostfire to come with us. The others are out there. We can't fight them alone." He took a few steps around the dragon, mindful of the massive claws. Frostfire's gaze followed him, watchful. Ned spoke to the beast in soothing tones, explaining, futile though it might seem, that the realm was threatened, that an ancient enemy walked the night. He remembered how Targaryen princes were said to speak Valyrian commands to their dragons, but Ned knew none of that. He had only his calm presence and the bond forged in that crypt beneath Winterfell so long ago. Frostfire let out a rumbling growl, half-lidding his eyes. Another of the brood, slightly smaller but still formidable, crept forward. Ned recognized it from glimpses at Winterfell, perhaps the second to hatch. It flicked out a forked tongue of sorts, tasting the air near Ned. This one was less patient than Frostfire, its movements restless, but it did not attack. Jon murmured softly, edging closer, allowing the dragon to scent him too. After several tense moments, the brood resumed a semblance of calm. Frostfire settled back on his haunches, keeping a watchful eye on the humans. Ned took that as an invitation to move around the clearing, letting Jon bring forward some of the meat they'd brought. Frozen cuts of venison they hoped might serve as an offering. The younger dragons accepted it, tearing it apart, though they also hissed, perhaps irritated that the men dared approach. Frostfire, meanwhile, seemed more curious than hungry, as though remembering a simpler time when it was small enough to be held in Ned's arms. Darkness returned swiftly in that far northern gorge. They made camp at the fringes of the clearing, carefully lighting a single fire. The brood tolerated their presence but gave no sign of deeper acceptance. Ned slept in fits, half expecting to be devoured at any moment. Yet the dragons remained aloof but not hostile. By the faint light of dawn, Ned decided they must attempt to lead Frostfire and whichever other dragons would follow south, or at least closer to the wall. He rose, stretching his stiff limbs. The cold had sunk into his bones after a night exposed to the open sky. The men had kept watch in shifts. None had dared close their eyes for more than a couple of hours. The dragons were stirring, plumes of frost escaping their nostrils. From the vantage point at the bottom of the ravine, the sky overhead was a narrow strip of pearly gray. Ned took a breath, then approached Frostfire once more. He held out his bare hand, ignoring the pain of contact with the near-freezing air. Frostfire lifted his massive head, regarding him. Jon came alongside, carefully running his hand along the dragon's flank, though he could only reach so far. Frostfire allowed it, though a low growl suggested the beast's impatience. "How do we make him follow us?" Jon asked. Ned let out a breath. "We can try to guide him on foot, but if he takes to the sky we can't very well keep up. Perhaps if we ride." The thought alone was daunting. No man had truly ridden an ice dragon as far as Ned knew. The Targaryens had harnessed fire-breathing dragons, but these were different creatures, attuned to a colder magic. Could the principle be the same, or would it be madness to attempt it? Jon stared at Frostfire's vast bulk. "If you slip from his back, or if he shakes you off." Ned didn't let him finish the thought. "It may be the only way. If I can climb onto him, he might tolerate it. If not, well..." He stepped forward, tentatively reaching for the spines along the dragon's shoulder. Frostfire let out a sharp snort, but did not lunge. Adrenaline roared in Ned's ears as he found footholds among the ridges. With great care, he hoisted himself up onto the dragon's back, finding a place where the scales jutted enough to offer a precarious seat. The cold radiating from the beast's body was intense, even through Ned's furs and cloak. It felt like he was pressed against a block of eternal ice. He whispered soothing words, patting the great neck. Frostfire shifted, releasing a growl that shook Ned's entire frame. For an instant, the dragon's wings unfurled a fraction. Ned closed his eyes, bracing himself for the jolt of liftoff or a savage buck that would hurl him to the stones. Instead, Frostfire folded his wings again, as though uncertain. Ned realized his heart was pounding so loudly he could hardly hear anything else. Jon and the men stood below, gawking. "Gods," someone breathed. "He's actually on it." Ned risked a glance down, forcing a smile that was more grimace than cheer. "It seems we have an understanding." He tried to sound brave. Every muscle in his body was tensed for disaster. But after another moment, Frostfire huffed, turning his colossal head to peer at him with one swirling eye. Ned felt a flicker of what might be recognition or acceptance. Before Ned could steady himself, Frostfire's massive hind legs bunched and he leapt upward. The force nearly unseated Ned, who clung desperately to the spines. The dragon's wings snapped open with a thunderous crack. Icy wind whipped past Ned's face. He could do nothing but press himself as close to Frostfire's neck as possible, hands numb with cold and terror. They soared out of the ravine, rising with terrifying speed. Ned's stomach lurched as the ground dropped away, revealing the vast northern wilderness below. The other dragons let out raucous cries, many launching themselves after Frostfire. Jon and the men below scrambled in alarm. From his precarious perch, Ned saw the gorge receding swiftly, the pines turning to dark specks. The wind cut through his clothing, a stinging barrage of cold far worse than any winter he had known. Yet beneath him pulsed the living power of the dragon, each beat of its wings sending shockwaves through his body. He dared a glance around. Frostfire's flight was surprisingly smooth, though each gust of wind threatened to tear Ned's grip free. The beast soared in a wide arc, scanning the horizon. Ned took shallow breaths, trying to maintain some semblance of calm, though the primal fear of falling roiled inside him. Below, the other dragons emerged from the gorge, flapping in pursuit. Ned noted at least 4, though there might be more behind them. They glided in formation reminiscent of a wolf pack. Perhaps they were simply following their alpha, or perhaps they sensed a change in leadership. Frostfire swung southward, cutting across the pine forests. Ned forced himself to look down, orienting himself. He glimpsed a black line that marked the top of the wall in the far distance, a stark divider between the realm of the living and the savage north. That was where he must lead them. If the others threatened, the dragons needed to stand with men, not roam aimlessly in the wild. But how could he direct the creature's flight? He had no reins, no saddle, and no knowledge of how to command an ice dragon. Still, he tried leaning in the direction of the wall, patting Frostfire's neck. The dragon responded with a rumble, adjusting course slightly as though reading Ned's intention. An exhilarated rush surged through Ned. Perhaps their bond ran deeper than he dared hope. He pressed again, focusing on that distant black line. The dragon's wings shifted and they pivoted more directly south. A mixture of awe and relief swept over Ned. It was working, at least for now. They soared across the tundra, passing over scattered herds of elk that scattered in terror at the dragon's shadow. The other dragons followed, shrieking occasionally, stirring great plumes of snow from the ground. Ned felt as if he were in some strange dream, a lord of Winterfell leading a flight of ice dragons back toward the wall. He recalled the old tales of Brandon the Builder, of how the Starks once faced the long night. Would the presence of these monstrous allies make a difference this time? Ahead, clouds gathered, dark and heavy. A storm brewed on the horizon. Ned could taste the impending snow in the air. He urged Frostfire onward, but the dragon needed no urging to ride the swirling winds. Great arcs of frigid air buffeted them, though Frostfire's wings carved confidently through the gusts. Some of the smaller dragons struggled, falling behind or dipping lower to seek calmer currents. Lightning flashed in the distance, bizarre for such a cold storm, but it illuminated the sky in flickers of violet and white. Thunder rumbled, echoed by the roars of the brood. The vantage from on high revealed the bleak majesty of the far north, a land of ice and rock broken only by the occasional snaking river. Ned spotted no sign of human habitation. They had flown beyond most wildling camps. Then, in a flash of lightning, he saw movement below, a group of figures traveling across a frozen plain. They were spread out, too many to be a simple hunting party. He glimpsed the pale shapes of the dead, trudging onward, eyes glowing faintly even at this distance. Whites. Possibly dozens or more. The swirling storm made it hard to be certain. But they were on the move, heading south. The others were sending their thralls deeper into the realm of men. Ned felt a spike of dread. He had to do something. If these whites reached the wall, the watch could be overwhelmed, especially if they attacked multiple strongpoints. But how could he direct Frostfire to fight them now in the midst of the storm without risking being torn from the dragon's back by the gale? He had no easy answer. And the others themselves might be near. A single White Walker had nearly killed him. If there were more than one among that host. Lightning flashed again, revealing more whites than he'd first guessed, scores, maybe even hundreds. This was no random group. It was an army of the dead, shambling inexorably toward the wall. Horror clawed at Ned's gut. He urged Frostfire to descend, hoping to get a closer look and perhaps unleash the dragon's frost breath upon them. But as they dipped lower, a swirling gust shoved them violently. Ned nearly lost his grip. He tightened his thighs around the dragon's neck, arms trembling. Frostfire roared in irritation. One jolt too many and Ned might plummet to his death. Reluctantly, he pulled back, pressing upward. The beast responded, climbing above the worst of the storm. The other dragons swooped around them, uncertain. Ned shuddered at the thought of ignoring that undead army, but the storm made an immediate attack suicidal. Perhaps at the wall, with the help of the Night's Watch, they could plan a coordinated strike. The whites might be slowed by the weather and the terrain. The best course, Ned decided, was to push on, rally men, and then confront the dead with the combined might of dragons and the Watch's defenses. He whispered a prayer to the old gods that he was making the right choice. The brood soared on, battered by howling winds. On the horizon, the massive barrier of the wall grew gradually larger, a glimmer of pale blue in the swirling gloom. Ned clung grimly to Frostfire's spines, teeth chattering from the lethal cold. Yet he forced himself to remain focused, guiding the dragon as best he could. At last, they reached the open sky above the wall. Far below, Castle Black's towers and walls seemed tiny, dwarfed by the ice monolith. Ned could almost make out black shapes scurrying on the battlements, Night's Watch brothers who stared upward at the impossible sight, a flight of ice dragons led by a man astride the largest of them, swooping low over the fortress. Horns sounded, echoing from the ramparts. Ned saw archers on the parapets, though whether they recognized him or not was unclear. He urged Frostfire into a slow descent, circling like a great bird of prey. The wind off the wall buffeted them, but Frostfire maneuvered with a fluid grace that astonished Ned. The other dragons circled as well, though some roared and spat frost in agitation at the sight of so many black-clad men. The watch stood transfixed, likely unsure whether the dragons were friend or foe. Ned needed to land. Yet the courtyard of Castle Black was not built to receive a beast of this size. Instead, he guided Frostfire to a broader stretch of ground just south of the tunnel. Snowdrifts coated the rocky terrain, dotted with outbuildings. As the dragon approached, men in black scattered, shouting in alarm. Frostfire let out a roar that shook the very air, then backwinged, sending blasts of snow outward. Ned braced himself. With a bone-rattling thump, the dragon alighted, folding its wings. Ned was jolted violently, but he managed to keep his seat. He heard distant cries, some of fear, others of wonder. Swords and spears glinted in the corner of his vision. The brood circled overhead, uncertain whether to land or remain aloft. Ned patted Frostfire's neck, murmuring words of reassurance, though his own heart threatened to burst. Slowly, he slid down the dragon's shoulder, nearly toppling into the snow. His legs wobbled, unaccustomed to the ground after the wild flight. Men rushed forward, brandishing weapons, only to halt in confusion when they recognized Ned Stark. Jon appeared among them, having ridden back earlier with the rest of the scouting party. He approached with awe plain on his face. "You did it, father," he breathed. "He followed you." Jeor Mormont, too, arrived, his eyes wide. "Gods above," he muttered. "It's truly you. And that beast, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes." Ned nodded, forcing a shaky grin. "We have them, Lord Commander, or at least we have Frostfire. The rest circle overhead." He lifted his gaze to see 3 or 4 huge forms gliding in the swirling wind, uncertain whether to come down. They sensed the presence of so many men. "We must tread carefully. They can be allies, but they do not obey like trained hounds." Mormont let out a breath. "Allies, what a word for such creatures." He shook his head. "Well, I'll not gainsay your methods, Stark. Gods know we need every edge. If the others are stirring, perhaps these dragons are our best hope." A voice rang out from the side, "An unnatural hope," said a lean ranger with a scar across his jaw. "We dabble in powers we barely understand. We'll be as monstrous as the others if we rely on monsters." Ned turned, eyes narrowing. Any man who has faced a White Walker would sooner fight with an ally of flesh and blood, cold though it may be, than face them alone. "We do what we must to preserve the living." The ranger flinched but held his gaze for a moment, then bowed grudgingly. Mormont raised a hand to settle the men. "He's right. The dead won't wait for our scruples. If these beasts can hold back the tide, then we'd be fools to shun them." Jon moved closer to Frostfire, who regarded him with a baleful blue eye. "He's bigger than I imagined." "That and more," Ned replied, feeling the ache in his muscles. "We must find a place to keep him without endangering your men." Mormont pointed to a clearing near a craggy outcrop away from the main courtyard. "We have a spot where we keep supply wagons. It's open enough, though not walled in. If that suits." Ned nodded. "We'll try. But we have more urgent matters. There's an army of whites not far behind me, I fear. We spotted them crossing a frozen plain to the north. They may reach the wall soon." At that, the men stiffened in alarm. Mormont let out a grunt. "Then we must prepare at once. The wall's defenses are spread thin. I can dispatch ravens to Eastwatch and Shadow Tower, but we don't have enough men to hold every mile." Ned ran a hand over his beard, still numb with cold. "Then we must choose a site to confront them. We have these dragons. Perhaps we can break the whites before they reach the wall, if the brood can be rallied to strike. If the White Walkers themselves appear, well, we have Valyrian steel in Jon's sword, but not enough for all." Their eyes met, the gravity of the situation unspoken but shared. In that moment, Ned felt the full burden of his decision to bring the dragons south. Victory or doom, there was no going back. They were now a visible fact, no rumor or fleeting glimpse. Word would spread. The realm would soon know how Stark had harnessed, or was at least attempting to harness, an ancient power. The Lannisters and any other would-be kings would be forced to reckon with that knowledge. But that was a worry for another day. The immediate threat of the undead demanded all their attention. While Mormont and his officers hustled to plan defenses, Ned and Jon guided Frostfire around the perimeter of Castle Black, keeping a respectful distance from the structure so as not to panic the garrison. The other dragons, after circling overhead, tentatively glided down to land on nearby ridges, watching with restless interest. Snow swirled around their forms, and they sank into drifts as though it were a comfortable bed. Some men came with torches, but Ned instructed them to keep their distance. Too many lights or sudden movements might spook the brood. The hours that followed were a flurry of activity. The Night's Watch prepared barrels of oil, dragonglass, arrowheads, and sharpened stakes. Ned stood with Mormont in the courtyard, examining a rough map of the terrain north of the wall. They marked the estimated route of the whites, trying to guess where best to meet them. It was decided they would muster a force of watchmen and a handful of Ned's men, move out at dawn, and attempt an ambush at a narrow defile a few leagues from the wall. If they could lure the whites into that pass, the dragons might strike from above. Assuming the dragons cooperate, Mormont muttered, glancing out at the silhouettes in the gathering dusk. "I can only hope Frostfire will lead them," Ned replied. We must do our part on the ground. That evening Ned found a moment alone with John in a small corner of the yard. The younger man was fletching arrows with dragonglass tips, his hands trembling from the cold and lingering adrenaline. Ned knelt beside him, setting a hand on his shoulder. You fought bravely back there. That walker would have killed us both if not for Longclaw and your skill. John lowered his gaze. I only did what had to be done. But it terrifies me, father, facing them again. Knowing there are hundreds of whites, maybe more, and white walkers leading them. Ned squeezed his shoulder. Courage isn't never fearing, John. It's knowing fear and pressing on anyway. We stand for the living. That must be enough. They lapsed into silence, the weight of the coming battle filling the air. Men all around them moved with grim purpose, checking gear, whispering prayers to gods old and new. Overhead, the stars glimmered coldly, indifferent to the struggles of mortals. At dawn, Ned rose to see the sky stained a dull gray. Snow had fallen again in the night. He oversaw the men's departure, with Mormont leading a detachment of rangers and stewards, some carrying torches and casks of oil. Another group carried horns to signal the dragons. Ned would attempt to ride Frostfire once more, with John and a few watchers on the ground to coordinate. The other dragons would hopefully follow Frostfire's lead when the horns blew and the fight began. They left Castle Black behind, trudging through the tunnel and out into the frozen wilderness. Frostfire, reluctant to be enclosed, soared overhead with two companions. The rest of the brood remained perched on outcrops as if awaiting a summons. Ned wasn't sure if that was good or ill. Perhaps they would come once Frostfire engaged the enemy, perhaps not. By midday they reached the defile, a narrow corridor flanked by high ridges of rock, all coated in ice. The snow fell heavily, obscuring visibility. Mormont positioned men on either side of the pass, some hidden behind boulders, others perched above with arrows at the ready. Ned dismounted from his horse, scanning the bleak horizon for movement. The quiet was unsettling, broken only by the moan of the wind among the rocks. Frostfire and his two-winged kin wheeled overhead, occasionally vanishing behind curtains of snow. Then a horn blew from the watchers posted further north. Shapes emerged from the falling snow, twisted silhouettes limping or marching forward. Whites, many with shredded clothing and gaping wounds. Their eyes glowed a sickly blue. They came in a ragged column, some clawing at the air, others armed with crude weapons. At their center, Ned glimpsed a gaunt figure on a dead horse, its flesh half-rotted. A white walker? Or simply a white rider? It was impossible to tell at this distance. But the aura of dread that accompanied it was palpable. Ned positioned himself near Mormont, sword in hand. He had only ordinary steel now, as his best blade had been shattered in that last encounter. But he carried a dagger tipped with dragonglass, hoping it might serve if it came to close quarters. He nodded to John, who stood on a nearby rock with Longclaw ready. Time seemed to slow as the undead army lumbered forward. The watchers waited until the whites were well into the pass. Ned raised a hand and a horn blew. A volley of flaming arrows and torches rained down from above, igniting pools of oil they had spread in the snow. Fire erupted, halting the first ranks of the dead. Many whites were set ablaze, staggering blindly. But others pushed on, unaffected by fear. More arrows flew, some tipped with dragonglass shards. Those that found their mark destroyed whites swiftly, but not enough. The horde kept coming. From overhead came a thunderous roar. Frostfire dove down, unleashing a torrent of frigid mist that engulfed the center of the pass. Ned watched in both awe and horror as whites froze solid, limbs cracking off like brittle sticks. Yet not all were destroyed. Some seemed to shudder off the cold, stepping free of the ice as if it were only a mild inconvenience. The White Walker presence among them might have offered them resistance. Ned shouted for a second volley, and men heaved jars of oil down onto the whites, followed by flaming arrows. Frozen or not, the undead shrieked when exposed to fire. Many collapsed in smoldering heaps. Ned dared hope they might hold them off. Then, from the center of the horde, that gaunt rider lifted a long, crystalline spear. It glowed with a pale light. In one swift motion, it hurled the spear upward. Ned tracked it with his eyes, heart leaping. The spear struck one of the smaller dragons that had accompanied Frostfire. A piercing shriek tore the air as the dragon's flank erupted in a shower of ice shards. Ned's stomach twisted in horror. The wounded dragon spiraled, black blood or some dark fluid trailing behind it. The men below scattered as it crashed onto a ledge, thrashing in agony. The White Walker rider let out a sound that might have been laughter. The whites surged forward again, climbing over the burning remains of their brethren. The pass erupted into chaos. Rangers hacked at the undead with dragonglass axes and swords. Some fell, dragged down by rotting hands. Screams and the stench of decay filled the air. Frostfire roared, furious, swooping in a savage arc. The great beast smashed into the center of the horde, claws rending whites, jaws snapping. But the dead pressed in, heedless of fear, their icy, glowing eyes fixed on the living. More White Walkers emerged from the storm, tall and lethal, wielding blades of ice that cut down watchmen with horrifying ease. Shards of ice littered the pass. The clash of steel on unnatural frost echoed off the cliffs. Ned rallied a group of men pressing into the fray with torches and dragonglass. He saw Jon engaged in a fierce duel with a White Walker, Longclaw singing as it parried each inhuman blow. Flame from a fallen torch licked at the walker's legs, causing it to hiss in anger. Elsewhere, Mormont was nearly surrounded by whites, but some of his men charged in, hacking the creatures apart. Frostfire lashed out again, releasing a torrent of cold breath that froze an entire cluster of whites. But in the thick of the fight, that effect was unpredictable. Some living men were caught near the edge of the frost, stumbling back with frostbitten limbs. The other dragons joined in sporadically, but the pass was narrow, limiting their ability to maneuver. The wounded dragon screeched piteously on the ledge, pinned by an ice spear in its side. Ned's heart clenched, but he had no time to aid it. The White Walker rider singled out Ned, guiding its undead horse through the carnage. Ned felt an aura of cold deeper than anything he'd felt, save for the presence of the dragons. The walker swung its crystalline spear, aiming at Ned's chest. Ned dodged awkwardly, slipping on the frozen ground. He parried with a torch, but the weapon hissed and shattered the flame, leaving him with a useless stub of wood. He scrambled back, dragging his dragonglass dagger free. The walker dismounted in a single fluid leap, landing mere paces away. The skeletal horse continued forward blindly, toppling as men tackled it from the side. Ned and the walker circled each other. He could see the thing's eyes glimmering with an ageless malice. The entire pass seemed to hush for an instant. The walker struck first, lunging with inhuman speed. Ned just barely raised his dagger in time. The blade of the spear rang against obsidian, sending a jolt up Ned's arm. The walker hissed, continuing its assault with graceful, deadly arcs. Ned gave ground, struggling to keep up. A part of him realized that only dragonglass or Valyrian steel could harm this creature. He tried to find an opening, but it was like fighting a serpent made of ice. Desperate, he feinted left, then dove in under the walker's guard, ramming the dragonglass dagger toward its chest. The creature twisted impossibly, the spear shaft blocking Ned's arm. It let out a sound like cracking glaciers. Then a savage backhand caught Ned across the chest, hurling him onto his back. Air rushed from his lungs as he slammed into the icy ground. The walker towered over him, spear raised for the killing blow. A roar shook the pass. Frostfire crashed down behind the walker, jaws snapping. The walker spun, spear stabbing up at the dragon's neck. Frostfire lashed out with a monstrous claw, but the walker leapt aside, unbelievably nimble. Ned seized the chance to roll away, gasping for breath. Jon appeared then, sprinting across the chaotic battlefield. His face was set with determination, Longclaw gleaming with frost crystals along its Valyrian edge. The White Walker, pressed on two fronts, flicked its gaze from Ned to Frostfire to Jon. With a silent snarl, it feinted at Frostfire, then turned to face Jon, ice spear at the ready. Longclaw flashed, blocking the first strike. Jon roared, pushing forward. The walker glided back, each step silent. Ned scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his ribs. He retrieved his dragonglass dagger from where it had fallen, circling around to flank the walker. Frostfire reared up, unleashing a torrent of cold breath. The walker dodged aside, but ice encrusted the ground near its feet. Now it was forced to step carefully. Jon lunged, blade singing, forcing the walker to parry. Ned ducked in from behind, aiming a stab at the creature's back. The walker hissed in frustration, twisting to block Ned's blow with the spear's haft. But that opened it to Jon's slash. Longclaw bit into its side, and the walker let out a shriek that rattled the pass. Icy shards fell from its body. It whirled, a death blow aimed at Jon's neck, but Ned slammed his dagger into the crook of its elbow. The spear tumbled from its grasp, clattering on the frozen ground. Jon seized the opening, plunging Longclaw through the walker's chest. A sound like rending ice filled Ned's ears. The walker stiffened, then shattered into 100,000 fragments, each drifting away on the wind like snow crystals. The spear cracked and disintegrated. The undead horse and the surrounding whites collapsed soon after, some apparently reliant on that walker's magic. Others continued to fight, but the blow to their leadership was clear. Ned and Jon stood panting amid the swirling remains. Frostfire roared in triumph, smashing aside more whites with a sweep of his tail. On the cliffs above, watchers cheered. Fire and ice mingled in the pass, with half-burned whites stumbling about, men finishing them with dragonglass weapons. The White Walkers that had joined the fray were either destroyed or fled back into the storm. Slowly, the tide turned. When the final white collapsed, a hush settled over the battlefield. Corpses littered the pass, many still burning. The stench was indescribable. Several dozen men lay dead or dying. Among the fallen was the wounded ice dragon pinned to the rock ledge. Ned approached it, heart heavy. The spear had lodged deep in its side, and dark fluid seeped from the wound, forming black crystals where it met the cold air. Frostfire landed beside it with surprising gentleness, nudging the smaller dragon's neck. The smaller one let out a weakness, eyes half-lidded. Ned reached out to place a hand on the smaller dragon's flank, feeling the freezing scales tremble beneath his palm. He was no maester of dragons, he had no knowledge of how to heal such a creature. Frostfire nudged the spear, and it snapped, but the embedded portion remained. The smaller dragon convulsed, letting out a pitiful moan. Ned's heart twisted. John stood beside him, shoulders slumped in grief. "Can we do anything?" Ned swallowed hard. "I'm not sure. We can try to remove the shard. But it might be too late." The men gathered, uncertain. Some looked on with pity, others with wary fear. A few suggested ending the dragon's suffering. But Frostfire bared his teeth at any who stepped too close. The huge dragon lowered its head to the smaller's muzzle, letting out a low, mournful keen. In that moment, Ned felt an echo of sorrow from the bond that shimmered between them. Carefully, he reached for the broken spear embedded in the dragon's flank. Ice crystals had formed around the wound, and the flesh was unnaturally cold. With John's help, Ned tried to ease the fragment out, but the dragon let out a wail and thrashed weakly, nearly toppling them. Frostfire hissed, uncertain whether to attack or stay still. In the end, they managed to remove the largest piece of the spear, leaving a deep cavity. Black, freezing blood flowed, then gradually slowed. The dragon's breath came in ragged gasps, each exhalation forming clouds of icy mist. "We can build a stretcher of sorts," John offered, though how to carry a dragon the size of an aurochs was beyond them. Before they could decide, Frostfire shifted, placing his massive body alongside the wounded dragon. With surprising gentleness, he nudged his companion to climb onto his foreleg. The smaller dragon tried, but its limbs were weak. Eventually, with Ned and John guiding from the side, it draped itself partly over Frostfire's forelimbs. Then, in a powerful sweep of wings, Frostfire rose, carrying the wounded dragon with him. The sight was both heartbreaking and awe-inspiring. The largest ice dragon cradling its injured kin in flight, ascending over the pass. Men gaped, some crossing themselves, others muttering about the wonders and terrors of the gods. Ned could only watch, breath catching in his throat, as the brood that still remained soared after Frostfire. The wound. Ed Dragon let out a final keening cry that echoed across the rocky walls. Then they vanished into the swirling snow, heading north, deeper into the trackless wastes. Thus ended the confrontation in the pass. The living had emerged victorious, but at a cost. Many Black Brothers lay dead, and a young ice dragon lay mortally wounded. The White Walkers had been pushed back, for now, but everyone knew this was only the beginning. The others would regroup, send more whites, more walkers. The true war for the dawn was still to come. Ned knelt in the snow, exhaustion crushing him. His men approached, bearing injuries of their own. John sank down beside him, blood staining his cloak and gloves. Mormont strode up, breathing heavily, his brow slick with sweat despite the cold. "Well done, all of you. The day is ours, for now." His voice was hoarse. Ned stared at the stormy sky where Frostfire had disappeared. Part of him ached to call the dragon back, but he understood that the brood had its own code. A grievously wounded dragon might only survive in the deep wilderness of the far north, if at all. John exhaled, clouding the air. "They saved us, and we couldn't save one of theirs." Ned put a hand on his shoulder. "We did what we could. Frostfire knows we tried. Perhaps the brood will return again when the others threaten. I pray we'll be ready." Mormont nodded solemnly. "We must spread word of this victory, as well as the threat. The White Walkers are real. An entire army of the dead marched on us. Maybe now the rest of the realm will believe." Ned sighed, feeling the weight of the next step. They might call it northern superstition. And even if they believe the South is locked in war, will they pause their squabbles for a threat they cannot see? He shook his head. I fear our greatest battles lie ahead. But for this day at least we have held them. House Stark stands with the Night's Watch, and we have the memory of these dragons as our shield. Jon wiped sweat from his brow, smearing blood across his forehead. And if the realm will not unite willingly? Ned rose on unsteady legs. Then we will do what we must to protect the living, with or without their help. He gazed at the swirling gloom overhead, recalling the feeling of Frostfire's colossal heart beating beneath him during the flight. He remembered the searing cold of the dragon's scales, the savage roars that shattered the whites, the sense of ancient power bridging man and beast. A stolen egg from Valyria had unleashed a force older than any Targaryen dream, an alliance of winter's children. And though Ned did not consider himself a dragon lord, he felt certain that, in the battles to come, that bond would be tested again and again. When the men finally turned to gather their dead and tend to their wounded, Ned lingered a moment longer, gazing into the depths of the storm. Snow whipped across his face, stinging his eyes. He whispered a silent vow. That as long as House Stark endured, these dragons would have a friend in the realm of men, and that they together would stand against the night's icy terror. Fate alone would decide if that vow would save Westeros or plunge it into a new age of cold and blood. But for now, Eddard Stark carried both hope and dread in his heart, stepping forward into a winter that promised to change the world forever. Ned Stark stood beneath the lee of a battered watchtower in the pale morning light, the wind slicing across the field of burned and frozen corpses that littered the narrow pass. Wisps of gray smoke rose from half-buried embers. The reek of death clung to everything. Tattered cloaks fluttered over the bodies of fallen Night's Watch brothers. Many of the slain whites had crumbled into fragments of ice and dried flesh, unrecognizable as once human. Their defeat here in the defile felt painfully hollow. There were always more undead to the north, and the White Walkers would not be cowed by a single setback. The others had tested the Watch's resolve and found it fierce, but the cost had been high. Ned pressed a hand to his side, where bruised ribs still ached every time he drew breath. He had no time to rest or to dwell on the horrors of the night before. The North needed him, and the realm would need him as well if it ever set aside its squabbles to unite against the true enemy. The dragons had flown away, led by Frostfire carrying a mortally wounded broodmate. For hours after the battle ended, men peered skyward, hoping for another glimpse. But none of the great white silhouettes reappeared. Jeor Mormont's voice came from behind him. We'll burn the bodies soon. Some whites may only be playing dead until the magic that animates them finds strength again. We can't be too careful. The Lord Commander surveyed the carnage with a heavy heart. His men trudged among the remains, hauling the fallen aside. Smoke from makeshift pyres stung Ned's eyes as the watch set the undead aflame. Ned nodded, then exhaled, his breath clouding in the chill air. A wise precaution. I'll have my men assist. He gestured for Jory Castle and the handful of Winterfell guards who had survived. They set about collecting remains while Night's Watch rangers doused them with oil. In other circumstances, the sight of a field of corpses being systematically burned would have shaken Ned deeply, but by now he was numb. The White Walkers had shown their hand clearly. They commanded a host of the dead and would throw them against the wall again, soon and in greater numbers. Jon Snow approached, shoulders hunched beneath his black cloak. His left forearm was bandaged from an earlier wound. He walked carefully, favoring a twisted knee sustained in the fighting, but his expression was resolute. Lord Commander, Father, he said, standing before them with the formal bearing of a man who had been tempered by violence and fear. The men are asking what's next. Some want to return to Castle Black to lick their wounds. Others say we should pursue the Walkers before they reorganize. Mormont grunted. Pursue them with what? We've barely enough men to hold the wall, let alone chase an army of undead into the wilderness. They'll melt away in this damnable weather and strike where we're weakest. Ned placed a steadying hand on Jon's shoulder. We hold what ground we can. We make sure news of this reaches Winterfell and beyond. The White Walkers are real. The realm can't be allowed to ignore it any longer. Jon's jaw tightened. But will the South even believe us? They're locked in their own war for the throne. Ravaged by raids and ambition, or so the rumors say. Ned reflected on the letter from Cersei Lannister demanding he come to King's Landing to bend the knee or be branded a traitor. He thought of the letters from the Baratheon brothers, each proclaiming himself king in Robert's stead. The longer this farce persisted, the less chance any of them would unite behind a threat they couldn't see. "We must make them believe," he said finally. "One way or another." A weary hush settled. The last of the white corpses crumbled in the fires. Ned heard the crackle of flames devouring frozen flesh and shuddered. He turned to Mormont. "We'll head back to Castle Black, regroup, and send ravens across the 7 kingdoms. Perhaps the Vale, the Reach, some of them might at least heed the warning. I know White Harbor in the north will do its part. If we show them scars from real battles, if we bring proof of the undead, we might stir some sense of self-preservation. Or spark panic," said Mormont quietly. "But maybe panic is what they need. Better they panic now than wake up to an army of whites at their gates." They lingered a little longer to bury the dead of the watch in shallow graves. There were not enough men or resources for anything more. By the time they finished, the sun was halfway to its zenith, an anemic light in a sky overladen with clouds. Ned led the procession south. He come here to secure the brood's help, and in a savage way they had helped enough to hold back one assault. But the cost to both men and dragons had been high. He tried to suppress the guilt needling him. That smaller dragon might die from its wound. The brood would be diminished and the others would not stop. They traveled slowly, many men limping or helping carry wounded comrades. John rode beside Ned, his face set in grim determination. Neither father nor son spoke much, but every so often their gazes caught, acknowledging the unspoken bond forged by the night's horrors. They reached Castle Black by mid-afternoon. A flurry of activity greeted them. Maester Eamon tottered out with his assistants to tend to the injured. A line of black-clad watchers parted to let Ned and Mormont pass. Talk buzzed of the ice dragons. Men asked where they were, whether they'd come back. Rumors and half-truths spread. Some watchers credited the brood with turning the tide, others questioned if the creatures could truly be allies. Ned felt a profound fatigue settling on him, as though the cold had seeped into his bones. He handed off his horse, wincing at the pain in his ribs. John slid from his mount, ignoring his own aches, and hurried to speak with Samwell Tarley, who had stayed behind to man the ravens and keep the fortress in readiness. Ned saw Sam's round face, pale and fearful, nodding rapidly at whatever John told him. They both hurried inside the maester's tower. Ned found a moment's solitude in a cramped chamber off the main courtyard where a narrow window overlooked the eastern watch. The swirl of black cloaks, the battered men hauling gear, the anxious energy, it all reminded him of a castle on the brink of a final stand. Even the great ranging that had cost the watch so many lives months ago had not felt this desperate, from what he'd heard. Then again, the realm's illusions were cracking, the others were no legend. Perhaps fear had a sharper edge now that the truth was bare. He sensed a presence behind him and turned to see his son, Robb Stark, standing in the doorway. Ned's eyes widened. "Robb? How in the 7 hells?" Robb's gray fur cloak was dusted with snow. He wore a determined look, shoulders squared, as if bracing for an argument. "Father," he said, stepping inside. "I arrived at the wall late last night while you were away. The rangers told me you and John had ventured north to face an attack. I came as quickly as I could." Ned felt a whirl of confusion and alarm. "But you were supposed to remain in Winterfell to guard our home. If the Lannisters—" Robb cut in, voice low but insistent. "Winterfell is safe for now. If the Lannisters or any other foe marched north, our bannermen would hold them at Moat Cailin. Besides, I had to come. News of these White Walkers reached us through Maester Luwin, and I couldn't sit idle. The North needs to stand together." Ned's rebuke softened. He saw how much Robb had grown, how the trials of leadership were already chiseling away the boyish edges of his face. "I understand," Ned said quietly, "but your presence here leaves Winterfell vulnerable." "I left the castle in capable hands," Robb insisted, "with the Umbers and the Manderleys ready to respond. I'm not a green boy rushing off for glory, I know the cost of war. But if we're truly facing the end of days, I won't hide while my father and brother risk everything." Ned nodded slowly. He couldn't deny a faint surge of pride, though it was mixed with dread. "Very well. You're here now, and I suspect we'll need every sword. Though I pray this is not the war you'd hoped to fight." Robb's eyes flicked to the narrow window. "John told me some of what happened in the pass. Is it true you rode one of the ice dragons?" Ned allowed himself a small, grim smile. "I did. A madness, perhaps. It answered, or at least tolerated me. But they've flown off again, one gravely wounded. I don't know if they'll return soon. And if they do, how will we harness them?" "Harness is not the word," Ned said, shaking his head. "They're living creatures, old as the mysteries beyond the wall and as temperamental as the cold itself. We can't command them like horses. If they come, it will be of their own will, or because they remember the bond we once forged." They stood in silence, father and son, the tension of parted families lingering. Finally, Ned asked, "Tell me of Winterfell. Catelyn, how does she fare?" "She's worried. Tensions run high with the Lannisters. A messenger from Riverrun came, pleading for aid against Gregor Clegane and other raiders in the Riverlands. But Mother decided to hold off sending any large force. She fears the Lannisters want to draw us out. She asked me to relay her love and to beg you to come home as soon as you can." Ned's throat tightened at the mention of Catelyn. He yearned for the simple comfort of their bed, the sight of his younger children running through the courtyard. But duty chained him here. The others were coming and someone had to stand sentinel. "I will return as soon as the situation allows. But the threats to the realm are too great to leave the wall undefended." Robb nodded. "I understand. Until then, I'll stay by your side. If another attack comes, you'll need more than the Night's Watch to hold them off." Ned could not deny the sense of relief that stirred in him to have his heir near. Perhaps it was dangerous, but it was also a comfort. "Very well," he said gently. "Let's find Jon and the Lord Commander. We'll plan our next steps." They left the cramped chamber and headed to the central hall where Mormont had summoned his senior officers. Jon stood near the dais, conferring with Samwell Tarly over scattered parchments. Maester Aemon, ancient and blind, was seated at a small table, his unseeing eyes turned vaguely toward the voices around him. Several black brothers looked up as Ned and Robb arrived. Mormont waved them over. He tapped a map spread across a battered wooden table. "We were just discussing how best to respond to the next incursion. There's word from our scouts that a large group of wildlings are coming in from the west, fleeing something. The watchers at the Shadow Tower claim the wildlings talk of the dead sweeping down from the Frostfangs. If true, the others are moving at multiple points along the frontier." Jon leaned in. "The wildlings might be open to negotiation. If they're fleeing the whites, we share a common enemy." One of the black brothers scoffed. "Consorting with wildlings? Next, you'll say we should let them through the wall." Mormont glowered at the man. "Mind your tongue. Jon Snow is right. We face an apocalypse and the free folk may help us, or at least we can keep them from joining the White Walkers as whites. Better they shelter behind the wall than die and rise again as our enemies." Ned nodded. "I agree. Many in the realm won't understand, but we have no luxury for old prejudices now. Every living soul we can save is one less corpse for the others." Robb cast a curious glance at Ned. "We can't protect everyone. But if a massive wildling host arrives, do we open the gates? The Night's Watch isn't equipped to feed thousands." Mormont sighed heavily. "We'll do what we must. Maybe we can direct some to travel south if they'll go peacefully. The Giftlands might sustain a fraction, but not for long. Still, any solution is better than letting them die up here." A strained silence followed. They were plotting courses none of their forefathers ever contemplated, opening the wall to the wildlings, forging alliances with so-called savages. But the alternative, to cling to old enmities in the face of true darkness, was unthinkable. At length, Ned cleared his throat. "Let's discuss sending ravens to every lord who might listen. We should confirm that we have faced the undead. We have evidence. Dragonglass kills them, fire can hold them. Perhaps we can persuade Stannis or Renly to dispatch men north. The Vale might answer as well if Lady Arryn can be swayed." Mormont turned to Maester Aemon. "Write the messages. Be sure they convey the urgency." The old maester inclined his head, folding his gnarled hands. "I shall. Though I wonder how many ravens do we have to spare?" Samwell Tarly answered quietly, "Not enough, but we'll do what we can. We can send a few ravens to each major region. And we should let White Harbor and Winterfell know all we've learned." Aemon gave a faint smile. "Then we shall begin at once." The meeting dispersed, men going their separate ways with weary determination. Mormont and some of his senior officers discussed fortifying Eastwatch as the others might try to circumvent the main gates by sea. Ned lingered with Robb and Jon near the table, eyes drawn to the battered map of the north. Jon ran a hand over his close-cropped hair. "If only we had more men, 10 times our current numbers might hold the wall if we could man every fort. Right now, only 3 forts are occupied." Robb frowned, studying the crisscross of lines that represented topography. "And there's no chance the Lannisters or Tyrells would lend help. They're too busy fighting each other. What of the Starks calling banners? Could we bring the Northern Bannermen here?" Ned considered the notion. "A partial muster, perhaps? But pulling too many men from the North's holdfasts leaves our own lands vulnerable to invasion from the sea or from the south. We risk giving the Lannisters an opening to march unopposed. Even so, if the White Walkers break through, all of Westeros will fall in time." Robb straightened. "Then maybe we have no choice. Let the Lannisters come if they dare. We can defend Moat Cailin with a token force while the bulk of our banner men unite with the Watch. The real threat is from the north, not the south." John pressed his lips together. I don't disagree, but we have to be careful. If we rally our armies at the wall, the Lannisters might burn the north behind us. Our people starve. It's a harsh gamble. Ned listened to them weigh the dilemma and felt a surge of conflicting emotions. He taught both boys the importance of balance in war. Never show your entire strength to one enemy if it leaves your flank open to another. But this was no ordinary war. We'll send word to Winterfell to begin discreet preparations. Gather men, but do not raise the banners so openly that we provoke a southern invasion. We can organize supply lines to the watch. When the time is right, we'll move the main force north. For now, we must measure each step carefully. They spent the afternoon drafting letters. Samwell Tarly wrote in his neat hand while Ned, John, and Robb spoke the essential details: confirmation of White Walkers, sightings of a vast undead host, mention of the ice dragons that had aided them, though they downplayed that aspect. Worried the talk of monstrous beasts might overshadow the real peril. Ned wanted the realm to focus on the threat of the dead, not conjure a new fear that the Starks were forging a second reign of dragons. Still, the rumors would persist. Better to let them swirl unconfirmed than to proclaim the truth in official dispatches. Robb pressed for a message to Riverrun explaining the northern stance. Ned agreed, though he knew the Tullys were under pressure from the Lannisters. He prayed that Catelyn's family might at least spread the word through the Riverlands about the threat. If the lords in the Trident understood that this was about more than a southern power struggle, they might resist the Lannisters' manipulations. By dusk, a weary hush fell over Castle Black. Torches flickered along the walls, and the men took what small comfort they could in the security of stone ramparts. A cold wind slid down from the heights of the wall, penetrating every cor. Ned sat alone on a bench in the courtyard, trying to compose a final letter to Catelyn. He had no illusions that mere words could erase the uncertainty she faced, but he wanted her to know he was alive and that Robb had come, for better or worse. As he struggled with phrasing, he heard footsteps. John and Robb emerged from the darkness, carrying steaming bowls of stew. Robb offered one to Ned. "You need to eat." Ned set aside the quill and parchment with a sigh of thanks. He took the bowl and drank a mouthful of thin broth. The salt and warmth were welcome, even if it was meager fare. The three of them sat in a small circle, father and two sons bound by blood and by war. "Sam said the ravens will leave at first light," John mentioned, cradling his own bowl. "He's drafting as many letters as we requested. I just hope they reach their destinations before anyone decides to shoot them down out of suspicion." Robb's eyes flicked to the broad silhouette of the wall towering above them. "The realm is about to learn that nightmares walk again." Ned's voice was quiet. "They won't all believe it. Some will call it a hoax. But if even a few houses respond, we might hold the line until the rest awaken to reality." John took a spoonful of stew, then asked, "Father, if an army of the dead arrives in full force, can the brood truly tip the scales? They can freeze whites, yes, but some barely seemed affected if a White Walker was leading them." Ned thought of the smaller dragon pinned by that spear of ice. "They're powerful, but the others match their cold. Perhaps the synergy of fire, like from the Watch's torches, and the dragon's frost might work together. Still, I'm not certain we can rely on them as a trump card. They come and go on their own terms. Frostfire only fought so fiercely because it saw a threat to me and to the brood. If the White Walkers encroach upon the dragon's territory, they'll fight. But whether they'll fight at our side or just harry them on their own is the question." Robb set his empty bowl aside. "Is there any way to use that bond more strongly? Maybe if you returned to Winterfell with Frostfire, trained him, or at least built some routine." "It's not like training a direwolf," Ned said softly. "He's a creature of ancient magic. I can't pretend to know how. And now that one is wounded, the brood might hide deeper in the lands of always winter. They may nurse their wounds, and who knows how they'll react next time. I can't just whistle and have them appear." A faint note of hopelessness tinged his voice. Robb and John exchanged a glance. John set down his bowl and spoke, a quiet intensity in his tone. "Then we do what men must do, dragons or not. We gather allies. We shore up every fortress. We make sure the wall stands as the first and last line of defense." Ned gave a small nod, pride stirring in him at John's resolve, and at Robb's unwavering presence. "Yes, that's all we can do." The gods or fate will decide if that's enough. They parted ways soon after, each seeking a corner to rest. Ned found a cramped cell in the commander's tower, too weary to care that the mattress was lumpy and stale. He dreamed of swirling snow and dead faces lit by ghostly blue eyes, of frost fire's roar echoing across a winter sky. He dreamed of Caitlin weeping alone in Winterfell, a raven's message clutched in her hand. He woke before dawn with his heart pounding and the taste of iron on his tongue, uncertain whether he'd truly slept or only drifted through fear. Morning broke with a bleak, colorless sky. Castle Black stirred, men trudging through slush and half-frozen mud. Ned emerged from his cell to hear the cry of ravens overhead. Sam and Eamon had set them loose with messages to every corner of Westeros. Dark wings beating against the pallid light, carrying warnings few would want to believe. Mormont ordered a council of war that same morning. Seated around a long wooden table in the common hall, the officers of the Watch and Ned, Jon, and Robb formed a grim circle. Jeor Mormont summarized the known threats: White Walker activity in the west near the Frostfangs, sightings of undead in the far eastern slopes. The Fist of the First Men had been used as a vantage by scouts who returned with chilling reports of entire wildling villages gone silent. Ned's mind churned, recalling the thousands of wildlings Mance Rayder had once tried to unite. Were they all now potential whites if the others had slaughtered them? The scale was staggering. Robb asked about sending out further rangings. Mormont shook his head. Too dangerous. We're stretched thin. Any large group we send risks annihilation. Better to dig in and wait for the next move. If the wildlings approach, we'll see if we can parley or lead them through the gates if they're peaceful. If we try to range deep into the haunted forest, we might lose half our men for little gain. Jon tapped the table thoughtfully. We do have a handful of rangers who know the territory well. If we keep the party small, they might slip past the whites and gather intelligence. Mormont regarded him. You volunteer? If needed, Jon said. I'm not the best ranger, there are men with more experience. But I'm willing. Ned's fatherly instinct bristled. He didn't want Jon risking his life any more than he had already. But he also knew that manning the wall was about sacrifice. Let's consider a smaller scouting party, but only with the best trackers. We need to know if the White Walkers are massing for another assault or if they're regrouping deeper north. Very well, said Mormont. We'll gather volunteers, ones who've proven able to handle themselves in extreme cold and who can keep silent. You'll coordinate with them, Lord Stark, if you wish. We can't spare many, though. Ned inclined his head. I'll do what I can. The next days passed in a tense lull. Castle Black braced for a second wave of undead. The Watchers perched high on the ice ramparts, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Word came that Eastwatch had spotted a handful of whites wandering the shoreline but managed to burn them before they could cause real harm. The men at the Shadow Tower, meanwhile, had seen no major force of undead since the last confrontation, though they heard rumors from wildling stragglers about entire columns of whites moving through the mountains. Ned took the time to rest his bruised ribs. Maester Aemon's concoction soothed some of the pain, though the memory of that White Walker's chilling strength haunted him. He spent evenings with Robb and Jon, discussing what the future might hold if the realm refused to unite. Occasionally a raven arrived with uncertain news. The War of the Five Kings raged on, with Renly Baratheon forging alliances in the Reach while Stannis remained at Dragonstone. Tywin Lannister had apparently marched east toward Harrenhal, leaving King's Landing in the hands of Cersei and young Joffrey. None of that boded well for the North receiving any help. One crisp morning, a half-frozen courier arrived from Winterfell. He bore the direwolf sigil on his cloak, and his horse nearly collapsed at the gates from exhaustion. Robb rushed to meet the man, who managed to gasp out that he carried urgent letters from Catelyn Stark. Ned escorted the courier inside, where a hot drink helped revive him. Then they tore open the sealed missive in the privacy of Mormont Solar. Ned read Catelyn's scrawling words, which spoke of growing tensions in the Riverlands, raids from Lannister forces, and the uncertain stance of many southern lords. She reported that the phrase sat on the fence, as always, but that they too had heard rumors of undead in the north. They called them ghost stories, though a few travelers swore by them. Catelyn also mentioned that rumored sightings of white dragons near the Shivering Sea had alarmed merchants at White Harbor. She ended with a plea: I fear if you and Robb do not return soon, the Lannisters may press an advantage. We can hold for now, but the realm is tearing itself apart. If the threat in the north is truly as dire as your letters say, then we stand at a crossroads. Either we stand aloof and let the south destroy itself, or we intervene in some fashion to gain allies. We have no easy path. Please, Ned, come home if you can. Our children need you. I need you. Ned set the letter aside, feeling the tug of conflicting duties. Winterfell was his seat and needed its lord. The realm beyond the neck was in chaos and the White Walkers were a looming cataclysm. He looked at Robb, who'd read the letter over his shoulder. Robb's joy tightened, concern shining in his eyes. "This is what I feared," Robb muttered. "The Lannisters press their advantage while we linger here. They'll choke off the Riverlands, maybe even threaten the neck. All the while, the dead gather beyond the wall." Ned nodded slowly. "I can't abandon the watch entirely. We might schedule a trip back to Winterfell, show our face, rally our bannermen, ensure the holdfasts are secure. Then we return north with an army or at least a strong contingent." Robb considered. "That might work as long as we're swift. If we keep the journey quiet, the Lannisters might not intercept us." Jon stood nearby, arms folded. "I know it's not my place, but we must consider that the White Walkers could attack again at any time. We don't know their strategy. If they sense the bulk of House Stark's strength is far away, they might strike." The voice of duty warred with the voice of fatherhood in Ned's mind. "You're right, Jon. But my presence in Winterfell may be needed to unify our bannermen. Otherwise, they might hesitate to muster for a threat they've never seen." He turned to Mormont, who was reading the letter as well. The Lord Commander rubbed his bearded chin. "We can't demand you remain here forever. The Watch stands outside the politics of the realm, but we're not so blind as to ignore the North's situation. Perhaps a short visit, take what time you need to secure the North, then bring a host back. The others will come eventually. The more swords we have when they do, the better." Thus, they decided. Ned would travel south for a short duration, accompanied by Robb and a suitable escort to reaffirm House Stark's authority and muster a force. Jon, loyal to the Watch, would remain at Castle Black, though it pained him to see them leave. Ned insisted that Jon coordinate with Mormont about any developments, especially if the brood reappeared. They prepared swiftly. Supplies were packed, horses readied. Samwell Tarly offered to pen more letters on Ned's behalf if time allowed. Jon and Ned shared a terse farewell in the courtyard the next morning. Jon's eyes shone with longing. He missed Winterfell, but his vow bound him here. "Take care, father," Jon said, voice thick with emotion. "I'll see to it that if there's any sign of Frostfire or the others, we send a raven at once." Ned clasped Jon's shoulder. "You've grown into a fine man. Your watch is a lonely one, I know, but we need men of honor here. If we fail, there may be no realm left to dispute. In time, I pray, we'll stand side by side again, perhaps in the final battle that's coming." Jon swallowed. "Until then, I'll do my duty." They embraced, ignoring the curious stares of onlooking black brothers, and Ned felt pride surge within him. He told Jon to remain vigilant, to watch for wildling refugees or any sign the White Walkers were massing. Then he and Robb mounted, leading their small retinue Jory Castle and a score of Stark guards south through the winding tunnel beneath the wall. The north stretched before them, vast and white. A fresh snowfall covered the King's Road, forcing them to ride carefully. They passed uninhabited outposts, occasional ruined villages, and saw precious few travelers. Most had retreated behind their own walls for the winter's unnatural onset. At night, they huddled around campfires, with men on watch for roving dire wolves or worse. Robb sometimes prowled the perimeter, gray wind at his side, the great dire wolf scanning the darkness with golden eyes. On the fourth day, just after they had broken camp, a lone rider emerged from the swirling snow, hailing them. The man wore a heavy fur cloak and carried a battered banner showing the Cerwyn sigil. Ned recognized him as a Cerwyn soldier who had visited Winterfell once. The man bowed, breath steaming in the cold air. "My Lord Stark," he said hastily, "we've ridden from Cerwyn lands to find you." "My lord, news from Winterfell. The rumor is that Lannister riders have been spotted near the neck, as if probing the region. Lord Bolton has sent men to Moat Cailin, but we do not know if it's a large force or just scouts." A spike of alarm jolted Ned's chest. "Have they crossed into the north?" "Not as far as we know, my lord. They keep to the southern side of the neck, but they seem to be testing how we respond. It might be a prelude to an invasion, or it might be intimidation." Robb clenched his fists. "Damn them. Are they truly so blind to the threat beyond the wall that they'd start a war in the north now?" Ned's expression hardened. "Cersei and Joffrey care only for their power. They ignore the White Walkers as a tale to scare children. They'll exploit any perceived weakness. If they think our forces are spread thin, they might push forward." He turned to the Cerwyn soldier. "Ride with us. We're heading to Winterfell. Once there, we'll muster a force to fortify Moat Cailin. If the Lannisters do cross into the north, they'll find a reception they won't soon forget." They set off at a brisker pace, though the snow slowed them. Unease simmered among the men. The sight of Lannister forces near the neck was alarming enough, but the watchers in every direction spoke of storms, White Walkers, and an early winter that threatened to swallow them. War on two fronts, one against the living, the other against the dead, was the nightmare scenario Ned had prayed to avoid. Yet it seemed fate cared little for his prayers. By the time they reached Winterfell, nearly 2 weeks had passed. The gates stood open for them, watchers on the battlements shouting welcomes. Ned felt a pang of relief at seeing the familiar towers and walls. Snow covered the courtyards and ramparts, but the castle's hot springs kept some of the interior wards relatively clear of ice. Servants rushed to greet them, helped stable their horses, and guided them inside. Catelyn waited in the great hall, flanked by Sansa and Arya, who clung to her sides. Bran and Rickon, too, hovered at the edges, wide-eyed. Ned's heart ached at the sight of them. The moment he entered, Arya broke into a run and hurled herself at him, nearly knocking him over. Sansa followed more decorously, tears shining in her eyes, while Rickon hid behind his mother's skirts before eventually peeking out. Bran stood with more composure than Ned remembered. He was growing fast, but he still wore the innocence of youth on his face. Catelyn's eyes were bright with unshed tears. She met Ned's gaze, reading in it the gravity of what he'd seen. He moved forward, pulling her into an embrace. The children crowded around, each seeking reassurance that the father they feared lost to the mysteries of the North was truly here. Only after a moment of clinging to one another did Ned notice the hush in the hall. The servants and guards were watching, tense. He drew back from Catelyn, nodded to them, and spoke. "I'm home and I bring grave news. Summon my bannermen and advisors. We must speak, for the threat beyond the wall is worse than any rumor." Catelyn ushered the children aside, though Arya demanded to know everything at once. Sansa just seemed relieved, while Rickon clung to Ned's cloak. Bran wore a serious expression. "Father, is it true the dead walk?" the boy asked softly. Ned hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Bran. They do. But we're here to protect you." Bran's eyes grew distant. "Then I want to help protect the North too. We have direwolves and you have dragons," I heard in whispers. Ned knelt to look his son in the eye. "Whispers travel fast. For now, just know that we have allies and we must be strong." He stood and joined Catelyn. They walked to a private solar while servants bustled to prepare hot food and fresh clothing. Robb went off to speak with the castellan about securing the gates. Along the way, Ned noted that the corridors were colder than usual, the presence of snowdrifts in corners a sign that winter held the land in its icy grip earlier than expected. That old sense of unease returned. Was the unusual cold partly the dragon's doing, or simply the natural turn of seasons spurred by the other's magic? In the solar, Catelyn turned to him, worry plain on her face. "Ned, I'm overjoyed you're alive and that Robb is here. But the realm is in turmoil. The Lannisters threaten, and we have no word if King's Landing will respect the North's neutrality. The Freys are as slippery as ever. And now these rumors, you confirm them as truth." He sighed. "Yes, I do. I fought them myself. The others live and they command an army of whites. They attacked Castle Black. We held, but only barely. The brood of ice dragons helped us, but they've flown away, possibly to nurse their wounded." She paled. "Gods be good. Then we must gather what forces we can. The letters you sent said the entire realm must unite, or we all perish." Ned rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Yes. But uniting the realm is easier said than done. The Lannisters sit on the Iron Throne with Joffrey as king, Stannis and Renly both claim the crown, and the Riverlands are under siege. Chaos reigns." Catelyn moved closer, taking his hands. "I've tried to hold Winterfell together. But you are Lord of the North. The bannermen will heed your call more readily than mine. If we must muster an army to protect the wall, let us do it swiftly, before the Lannisters march north in earnest." He nodded, resolving to act. "We'll call the banners. But we must do so in a way that doesn't provoke an immediate invasion from the south. We'll claim it's to quell the wildling threat, which is half true. If the Lannisters attack us unprovoked, they'll look like aggressors." Catelyn exhaled. "And if that doesn't deter them? Then we meet them at Moat Cailin. The Neck is our stronghold. A small force can hold it against larger armies, so the rest can move north to aid the wall if needed. Robb and I will coordinate the muster. We'll see who answers our call." Catelyn gave him a trembling smile, her relief tempered by the ominous future. "I trust you, Ned, but I hope the other lords see reason. If the others come, we can't fight among ourselves. We can only pray," Ned said softly, squeezing her hands. "The old gods watch over the North, if we prove worthy." Word went out at once. Ravens flew to every noble house from White Harbor to the Wolfswood, calling on them to send men to Winterfell. Officially, the cause was the threat of wildlings crossing the wall, though Ned included coded language hinting at a graver menace for any lords who were in the Starks' closer confidence. While they waited, Ned reacquainted himself with his children. He found Sansa in the Godswood, teaching Rickon a simple hymn, her voice echoing across the tranquil pool. Arya sparred with a wooden sword in the courtyard, eyes shining with a fierce spirit that both amused and concerned him. Bran read old tales of the Night's Watch in the library, soaking up stories of the long night with quiet determination. Ned's heart ached with pride and fear. The world they inherited was more dangerous than the one he'd tried to give them. When the bannermen began to arrive, the courtyard and Great Hall buzzed with new life. The great John Umber roared with laughter at the mention of undead, swearing he would wrestle a white bare-handed if it dared cross his path. Roose Bolton came quietly with his pale eyes and soft voice, offering subdued agreement to Ned's plans while reserving his own counsel. Lord Serwyn and Lord Hornwood pledged their swords eagerly. Wyman Mandoley sent word that he would come with a sizable retinue from White Harbor, though the roads were treacherous. One by one, the houses of the North gathered in Winterfell's halls, forming a patchwork of loyalty and wariness. At a grand council in the Great Hall, Ned stood at the head of the dais, flanked by Robb, Catelyn, and the older lords of note. Trestle tables had been rearranged into a horseshoe shape so everyone could see each other. Outside, a thin swirl of snow drifted from a leaden sky. The flickering light of torches illuminated the serious faces of men who had come to weigh war and duty. Ned began, voice echoing in the vaulted chamber. "Lords of the North, I thank you for answering my call. Many of you have heard rumors of unrest beyond the wall, wildlings, yes, but also darker shapes. I have seen them with my own eyes. The Dead Walk, led by beings we once thought were legends, the White Walkers." A murmur spread through the hall. Some men looked uneasy, others skeptical. The great John pounded his fist on the table. I've heard the tales from your men, Lord Stark. So you say it's real? Then let them come, I say. I'll chop them down. A few chuckled, but Ned spoke over the noise. This is no jest. The White Walkers are formidable. They command the bodies of the dead, an army that grows with every victim. The Night's Watch barely repelled an attack with heavy losses, and that was but a fraction of their strength. He went on to detail the horrors faced at the pass, omitting the role of the dragons until the very end. He didn't want to overshadow the threat of the walkers. When he finally admitted that ice dragons had appeared, hush fell. Some stared, others wore expressions of awe or doubt. Lord Glover cleared his throat. "You claim the North has dragons?" Ned looked at him levelly. "I do. But they are not our thralls, nor do we command them as the Targaryens once did. They fight on their own terms. They answered our need in one battle. We cannot be certain of their continued allegiance." "What does King's Landing say about all this?" asked Lady Mormont of Bear Island, a fierce woman known for her bluntness. Ned's tone grew grim. "The Lannisters hold King's Landing under the boy King Joffrey. They pay no heed to these reports. War distracts them. Renly and Stannis both claim the crown, and the Riverlands are aflame. We have no allies to the south. Our best hope is to defend ourselves with our own strength. Moat Cailin must be fortified. The rest of U.S. may need to march to support the Night's Watch if the others advance." A wave of uneasy discussion broke out. Some lords spoke of building new stockpiles for winter, others worried about sea raids from the Iron Islands if they were all away. Roose Bolton listened in silence, fingertips steepled. At last, Ned raised a hand for quiet. "I cannot command you blindly. But as Warden of the North, I beg you to trust my judgment. We face a threat beyond mortal foes. If we do not unite and prepare, we risk annihilation. The North has ever stood resilient in the face of winter. We must do so again, more fiercely than ever." Gradually, the lords nodded. The great John declared that the Umbers would stand firm. Wyman Mandoley's man pledged support once the Lord himself arrived. The younger lords, looking nervously at one another, murmured agreement. Even Roose Bolton, after a moment's pause, inclined his head. Thus, they drew up a plan. A third of the assembled forces would hold Moat Cailin. Another portion would remain in key strongholds to protect the populace. The largest group, perhaps 5,000 men under the combined banners, would be ready to march north if the Watch sent word that the White Walkers were advancing. They might also press south if the Lannisters launched a full-scale invasion, but the priority was the wall. The men left Winterfell in trickles, returning to gather their troops. The promise was that within a month, the hosts of the North would be assembled. Ned felt some relief. At least they were doing something. Yet he couldn't shake the sense that time was short. The White Walkers would not wait politely while the North mustered. If the others decided to strike soon, Castle Black could be overrun. He prayed that Jon and Mormont would hold. Days turned into weeks. The bustle of Winterfell grew, with more men arriving every day. The training yard rang with the clash of steel as recruits from far-flung villages tested their mettle. Herders drove flocks into hastily built pens, for feeding an army was no small feat. Ned spent every waking hour in councils, poring over maps, distributing resources, trying to coordinate a cohesive defense. Catelyn helped organize supplies, while Robb oversaw the training of new levies, Grey Wind ever at his side. One chilly dawn, Ned found himself in the Godwood. The ancient weirwood tree, its face carved in stark lines, loomed over the still pool. Snow clung to the red leaves, forming a silent tapestry of white and crimson. Ned knelt by the pool's edge, gazing at his reflection, a man who looked older than before, lines of worry etching his brow. He wondered if he was making the right choices. The old gods offered no immediate answers, only the hush of wind in the branches. He closed his eyes and let the quiet wash over him. Thoughts tumbled, memories of Robert's rebellion, of the wars that had cost so many lives. Were they about to face something far worse? He felt small before the unstoppable tide of fate. But there was a flicker of hope too. The North had always endured. And the dragons. He could not forget them, nor the bond he felt with Frostfire. Perhaps that bond was more than a fluke of magic. Perhaps it was destiny's way of giving them a fighting chance. A crunch of snow announced another's presence. He looked up to see Arya, wrapped in a thick cloak, wooden practice sword at her hip. She halted, as if she'd stumbled on a moment she shouldn't interrupt. Ned waved her closer. "Come, child." She stepped forward. Her breath formed little puffs in the cold air. "Father, I didn't mean to disturb you. I came to the Godswood to practice. It's quiet here." He stood, dusting snow from his knees. "No disturbance. Sit with me." They settled on a mossy root near the pool. Arya fingered the hilt of her wooden blade, restless energy radiating from her. "Is it all true? About the dead walking and dragons flying?" His expression was gentle. "Yes, it is. I wish I could say otherwise. The world is bigger and darker than we feared." Arya frowned. "I'm not afraid, not really. I just want to do something. Everyone trains in the courtyard, but they won't let me join. They say it's not proper for a lady." A rueful smile touched Ned's lips. Arya was as headstrong as ever. "You know, I've never forbidden you from learning to defend yourself. But the knights and lords, they have their ways. If you truly wish to practice, I'll find someone to teach you. But you must be discreet. The world can be harsh to a lady who wields a blade openly." She straightened. "I don't care what they think. I just don't want to be helpless." He studied his daughter, seeing in her a spark that reminded him of Lyanna, his lost sister. "Very well. In times of war, we need every soul who can fight. I'll speak to the Master-at-Arms about giving you lessons, if that is your wish." Arya's face lit up. "Yes. Thank you, Father." She half rose, then paused. "But you won't try to keep me safe in a tower if it comes to battle, will you?" Ned sighed. "I might try. A father's heart is prone to worry. But I know you, Arya. You'd find a way to slip out anyway." She grinned. "Yes, I would." They shared a brief laugh, though a somber note underlay it. War was coming, both from the south and the far north. Arya's determination to stand strong was both admirable and heartbreaking. Ned ruffled her hair gently. "Then practice well, but mind you don't injure yourself. The old gods see all." She nodded, hopped up, and scampered off into the snow, already drawing her little sword to swing at imaginary foes. Ned watched her go, torn between pride and dread at how quickly she was growing. When he returned to the Great Hall, Catelyn met him with letters that had arrived via Raven. One was from King's Landing, bearing the Lannister lion seal. Ned opened it warily. The contents confirmed his worst suspicions. Queen Regent Cersei demanded that Ned Stark travel south to account for his suspicious activities under threat of being declared an enemy of the crown. The language was couched in legalese, but the threat was clear. Either present himself in King's Landing essentially to face certain imprisonment, or worse, or face a royal decree of treason. Catelyn watched him read, her lips thinning with anger. "They taunt you." Ned set the parchment aside. "They do. The Lannisters want to force my hand. If I ride south, they can hold me hostage and keep the north in check. If I refuse, they'll declare me traitor and potentially march on us. Robb entered, reading the letter over Ned's shoulder. We're mustering an army anyway, so let them come. The neck will swallow their forces. Will not yield? Ned rubbed his forehead. Will not. But this is a precarious game. They might not launch a full invasion if they fear we have the numbers to repel them. They'd rather intimidate us into bending the knee. Catelyn's eyes flicked to the second letter. This one came from White Harbor, I believe. Ned broke the seal. It was a missive from Lord Wyman Manderley, who had just arrived on the outskirts of Winterfell's domain with a large retinue. He mentioned that a southern ship had docked at White Harbor bearing unusual news, rumors of a Targaryen girl across the narrow sea gathering support, and fresh sightings of dragons in Essos. A piece of meaningless gossip for most, unless you knew how Stark had discovered a brood of a different kind. Ned frowned, unsure what to make of it. It seems the entire world is stirring. Fire and ice both. Catelyn placed a hand on his. We can only focus on the threats we face here. Let the Targaryens across the sea do as they will. Our war is in the north. Ned nodded. A war on all sides, he murmured. Yet winter creeps nearer. Let's meet Lord Manderley and ensure we have all the support we can muster. Then we'll decide how to respond to the Lannisters' threat. They greeted Wyman Manderley in the courtyard that afternoon. He was an imposing figure, tall and wide as a door, wearing layers of fur that made him resemble a great bear. His men marched in organized ranks, the Merman banner flapping in the icy wind. Manderley greeted Ned with polite courtesy, though his eyes glinted with anxiety. Lord Stark, I came as soon as I could. The roads are treacherous, but White Harbor stands ready to aid the north. He paused, lowering his voice. My men say the weather grows colder each day, unnaturally so. Is it true we face something worse than mere storms? Ned led him inside, away from prying ears, and told him about the White Walkers and the undead assault. Wyman Manderley paled beneath his whiskers. By the Seven, what hope do we have? Ned spread his hands. We have the Night's Watch, we have our bannermen. And possibly, if the gods are kind, the brood of ice dragons might intervene again. But we must rely on our own strength first. Are you prepared to march if Castle Black calls? Wyman nodded, though he looked shaken. I'll muster as many men as can be spared, though White Harbor's ships must also remain on alert for any Ironborn raids. The Manderleys will do their duty. Ned thanked him, then showed him to the great hall where they'd gather with other lords. As they walked, Manderley confessed that travelers in White Harbor had told tales of monstrous white lizards glimpsed far to the north. Ned listened quietly, acknowledging that the realm had begun to piece together the story. But rumors alone might not be enough to rally the Southerners. That evening, a council formed with Manderley, Bolton, Serwyn, Umber, and the other leading lords who had arrived. They discussed how best to garrison Moat Cailin. The final agreement, Bolton would lead a vanguard there at once with 1,000 men to fortify the fortress in case the Lannisters tested the neck. Meanwhile, more men would follow in a fortnight to raise that number to 3,000. The rest would remain around Winterfell, training until a call from the Night's Watch demanded they ride north. After the meeting, Ned found himself alone at a hearth in the corner of the hall, swirling a cup of warmed ale. Roose Bolton lingered, stepping from the shadows with his usual quiet. The man's pale eyes settled on Ned. A cunning plan, my lord, to hold both fronts. But cunning might not suffice against the dead. Ned studied Bolton's inscrutable face. We do what we can. The living must stand together. Bolton's lips twitched in a semblance of a smile. Indeed. And if the Lannisters come, we'll meet them at Moat Cailin. A slaughter, no doubt. Then if the dead come, we retreat to be slaughtered anew. A savage world we live in. Ned stiffened at the casual mention of slaughter, but forced himself to remain calm. We endure. Bolton inclined his head in a gesture of agreement. I hope your faith is rewarded, Lord Stark. With that, he turned and slipped away into the corridor. Ned stared into the fire, uneasy. Bolton was an unnerving ally, but an ally nonetheless for now. He downed the last of his ale and tried to banish the creeping sense that no matter what they did, the realm's ruin loomed on the horizon. The days passed in a blur of training, councils, and managing logistics. Snow continued to fall lightly, adding inch after inch to Winterfell's courtyards. Farmers from outlying villages arrived, seeking shelter within the castle's walls for fear of both cold and rumors that outlaws prowled the roads. Ned ordered them accommodated as best he could, mindful of the need to keep a strong labor force for spring planting if spring ever came. In private, he told Catelyn that the usual seasons seemed skewed, as though an unnatural chill had settled upon the land faster than any normal winter. One gray afternoon, a clamor arose at the gates. Scouts returning from a range near the White Knife had encountered a group of travelers. Wildlings of all people who had somehow made it this far south. Ned hurried to the courtyard with Rob and a detachment of guards prepared for anything. The gates opened to reveal half a dozen ragged men and women, their clothing ill-suited for deep cold. They clutched crude spears and bows. At their head stood a tall, wiry man with tangled hair, his eyes shifting nervously. Another among them carried a child, limp with exhaustion. Rob's men surrounded them, weapons half-drawn. Ned stepped forward, lifting a hand. "Hold! Let them speak." The tall wildling gulped, his breath steaming in the icy air. "We mean no harm, Crow. I sorry you're not Black Cloaks. Thought, might as well be. We fled the dead. The wall was too dangerous. We skirted around the east, found a boat across a frozen stretch. The dead are everywhere." He shuddered. "Please, we just want to live." Ned's voice was measured. "You're far from home. This is Winterfell, seat of House Stark. We do not kill refugees who come peacefully." A hush passed over the courtyard. Some of the watchers muttered, uneasy at hosting wildlings. The child moaned, feverish, which spurred a twinge of pity in Ned. "We'll see that you get food and have your wounds tended. Are there more of your people wandering?" The wildling swallowed. "Scattered. Many. We lost track. Some might have gone west or tried for the sea. But the dead hunt us, always. We had to risk crossing your land." Ned glanced at Rob, who nodded slightly. The young lord stepped forward, beckoning a steward. "Bring them inside, warm them, feed them. Keep them under guard, but treat them fairly." The relief in the wildlings' faces was plain. They were led inside, half collapsing once the weight of fear eased. Rob turned to Ned. "They confirm our fears. The White Walkers push the free folk south. Sooner or later, thousands might appear at our gates if they find a way around the wall." Ned exhaled. "We'll do what we must to avoid a massacre. Better living wildlings than a horde of whites. The realm must understand that." But he knew all too well that few in the south would. They barely tolerated each other's banners, let alone free folk. That night, after the wildlings had been given a corner in the old tower to rest, Ned visited them, escorted by 2 guards. The tall wildling, who called himself Rangar, knelt by a small hearth, feeding the child bits of broth. Ned crouched beside him, noting the child's gaunt face. "Is the boy yours?" Rangar nodded. "My sister's. She died 2 weeks ago. Whites took her. I couldn't leave the boy behind. He's all that's left of our family." Ned felt a pang of sorrow. "I'm sorry." The wildling looked at Ned, eyes raw with grief. "They're coming, you know. We can run, but eventually, if they're not stopped, all the living will die. You Southerners have your walls and knights, but the dead don't care. They just keep coming." Ned said nothing for a moment. A log crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows. "We're trying to prepare. The Night's Watch stands and the North readies an army." Rangar let out a grim laugh. "An army of the living. Good luck. Unless you have some magic that can break them, or dragons." He spat the word as if thinking only of Targaryens. Ned stared into the fire. "Dragons?" Yes, ironically, the Starks did have something akin to that. Whether it was enough to break the White Walkers was another matter. He sighed. "Thank you, Rhaegar. Rest now. You're safe for the moment. We'll keep you fed. In return, if you recall anything more about the Walkers' movements, tell us." Rhaegar nodded. "Aye. A fair trade. Thank you." Ned stood, his mind roiling with questions. He left the tower and returned to the main keep where Catelyn waited in their chambers. She was braiding Sansa's hair, a nightly ritual that brought some normalcy to their household. Sansa curtsied at Ned's arrival and excused herself, heading to her chamber with a candle in hand. Ned watched her go, noticing how the castle's gloom made her appear older than her years. Catelyn set aside her comb and beckoned Ned to sit beside her near the small hearth. "What troubles you?" He explained the wildling's plight, Rangar's words. Catelyn listened quietly, eyes darkening. "So many families torn apart," she murmured, hugging herself. "I can't imagine, and yet I fear we may face the same if the wall fails." Ned wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I intend to return north soon, once the majority of our forces have mustered. I can't abandon the watch with so many threats closing in." She leaned against him, her warmth a small solace against the unrelenting cold. "I know. And I support you. But I worry, what if the Lannisters strike the moment you leave? Robb will remain here with half our forces ready to march south if need be. We'll maintain strong defenses at Moat Cailin. It's all we can do." Catelyn closed her eyes. "We do what we must. The alternative is unthinkable." They lapsed into silence, the crackle of fire the only sound. Ned wondered if this was how the first men felt when they faced the long night, caught between terror and duty, forging alliances with children of the forest and unknown powers. History was repeating itself in a twisted form. The thought churned his stomach. In the following days, the northern hosts continued to assemble. Wagons filled the courtyard, loaded with provisions. Smiths toiled day and night, forging dragonglass-tipped spears and arrowheads. Ned had sent to Dragonstone for more obsidian, but Stannis was unreachable, caught in his own war. They had to rely on what meager deposits lay within the north. At last, the time came for Ned to depart. He formed a column of 2,000 men, a mix of experienced soldiers and younger recruits. They would ride for Castle Black, braving the harsh roads to reinforce the watch. Robb would stay with the rest, over 4,000 strong, at Winterfell until the final lords arrived. Then, if circumstances demanded, Robb could lead them north as well, or guard the realm from southern encroachment. The morning of departure dawned steel-gray, snow drifting lazily. Ned stood in the courtyard, strapping on his cloak. Catelyn clasped his hand. "Return to me," she whispered. He kissed her forehead, then embraced each child. Arya pressed something into his hand, a small carved wolf she'd made. Sansa curtsied, tears glistening unshed. Bran managed a solemn nod, and Rickon clung to Ned's leg before letting him go. Robb clasped Ned's forearm. "Father, I'll keep Winterfell safe. I promise. Grey Wind and I will ensure no Lannister footsteps near these walls." Ned nodded. "I know you will. But be wary. They're cunning." A final, lingering look passed between father and son. Then Ned mounted his horse, raising a hand to signal the march. 2,000 men formed ranks behind him, banners of Stark, Umber, Serwyn, Hornwood, and others. Hoofs churned up the fresh snow. The portcullis groaned upward, and they rode out of Winterfell, bound north once more, into the teeth of winter. The journey was arduous from the start. Snow had deepened since Ned's last passage, forcing them to move at a crawl in some stretches. Wagons became mired, men shivered in their cloaks. At night, wolves howled in the darkness, and Ned remembered the months he'd spent traveling as Robert's Hand, how easy life had seemed then by comparison. Now, the weight of all the north pressed on him. The first legion of men he led might only be the beginning. If the rumors of an undead horde were true, far more might be needed. Yet each morning they rose, lit fires to warm themselves, and pushed onward. The sky seemed never to lighten fully, an eternal dusk or dawn that left them in a half-world of cold. Days blurred together until, at last, they spied the towering wall in the distance, an icy monolith that shimmered under cloudy skies. Men exhaled in relief. The sight of that ancient barrier gave them hope. Behind it lay some measure of organized defense, at least. They reached Castle Black to find the gates closed and watchers on the battlements calling anxiously for identification. Ned hailed them and, once recognized, was ushered in. The courtyard was busier than he remembered, ranks of black brothers drilling with spears, stacks of new arrows. Jeor Mormont strode out, relief plain on his face. "Lord Stark, you've come. And with an army, by the gods. We half feared we'd be left alone until it was too late." Ned dismounted, wincing at the stiffness in his legs. "We do not abandon our own. This is but a fraction of our muster. More may follow if needed." He surveyed the bustle. "You've been preparing." Mormont nodded. "Aye, we have. Reports come daily of whites prowling the edges of the forest. No massive assault yet, but we suspect they're gathering. Jon Snow and our best trackers just returned from a short reconnaissance. He'll want to speak with you." They found Jon in the common hall, conferring with a group of black brothers. He looked grimmer than ever, face drawn. When he saw Ned, relief flooded his eyes, though he maintained his composure. "Father, you made it. The road must have been hard." Ned clasped his hand. "We endured. Now tell me what you've learned." Jon motioned to a crude map spread across a table. "We ventured a dozen miles beyond the wall, only a small party. We found more footprints of the dead, along with signs that the White Walkers are traveling in small bands rather than one large army. They seem to be encircling the region, maybe hunting pockets of wildlings or scouting for weaknesses. We did see something else." Ned felt a prickle of apprehension. "Go on." Jon pointed to the far north on the map, near the Frostfangs. "We caught a distant glimpse of large shapes flying, ice dragons, at least 2 or 3, crossing over the mountains. They might have been the same brood, or part of it, traveling deeper into the wilderness. We have no idea what drew them there." Ned's heart squeezed at the mention of the brood. "Did they appear wounded? Was Frostfire among them?" Jon shook his head. "Too far to tell. They vanished quickly. But it means they're still out there, not returning to Castle Black. Perhaps they have their own battles with the others or their own land to protect." Mormont harumphed. Well, if they choose to fight the others on their own, we can only hope they thin the undead ranks. But we must plan as if the dragons won't come. Good you've brought soldiers, Stark. We'll need everyone. They spent the next hours establishing a new perimeter. Ned's men reinforced Castle Black's defenses, manning the walls with bows and dragonglass arrows. Scouts ranged along the base of the wall, ensuring no whites crept close. The presence of so many northern soldiers boosted morale among the Watch brothers who'd once felt abandoned now stood taller, seeing that the realm, or at least the north, had not forsaken them. But the question remained, when would the others strike, and in what force? Days slid by without a major assault. Men grew anxious, scanning every snow-laden horizon for a glimpse of pale shapes. Ravens came and went, carrying cautious messages of southern turmoil. Joffrey's reign grew bloodier, the riverlands burned, and Renly advanced from the south. None of it seemed to slow the chill creeping over the north. At last, a new crisis arose from an unexpected quarter. Wildlings by the hundreds appeared from the northeast, ragged and desperate, fleeing in scattered groups. Scouts reported them streaming across frozen lakes, risking the edges of the shivering sea, anything to escape the whites. Within days, Castle Black faced the real possibility of a refugee flood. Jeor Mormont called a council with Ned, Jon, and the ranking officers. Ned folded his arms. We can't simply slaughter them. That would be inhuman, and it would only feed the others if they rose as whites. Mormont exhaled heavily. We don't have the resources to shelter them all. The Watch can't even feed itself properly in a hard winter, let alone hundreds more. Jon glanced at Ned. Could we guide them south to the gift and let them disperse into the north? Or ask them to swear to serve in exchange for land? Some black brothers stiffened at the idea, a break from centuries-old tradition. But Ned saw a kind of sense in it. We can't fill the north with wildlings who might cause trouble. But neither can we let them die and become the others' recruits. Perhaps we select the able-bodied among them to serve under watch, and let the women and children pass deeper into the gift. If they behave, they live. If they cause chaos, the local lords can deal with them. Mormont looked unconvinced but also saw no better path. A risky gambit, but better than letting them feed the White Walkers. We'll do it with caution. We'll need men at every crossing to supervise. Lord Stark, I'm afraid that burden will fall partly on your soldiers. My own are fully tasked holding this castle. Ned nodded. We'll do what must be done. So it began. The next weeks saw a slow parade of frightened wildlings, families and raiding bands alike, trudging toward Castle Black. Each group was met by Ned's men or the Watch. Weapons were confiscated. They were offered food and a chance to pass south under guard. Many wept with relief, though some spat curses, calling the Crows traitors to let them pass only as near prisoners. Yet they had no choice. The entire region beyond the wall was death's domain now. Amid this refugee crisis, rumors spread of White Walkers stalking the outskirts of these large groups, occasionally picking off stragglers. Scouts found frozen corpses that did not remain still for long. An undercurrent of fear pervaded everything. One night, a horn blast startled the entire castle. Ned rushed to the walls, heart pounding. He peered into the moonlit darkness below the wall. Torches glimmered on the plain, revealing a large group of wildlings, perhaps 50, pursued by scuttling silhouettes. Shouts of alarm rose as men realized that whites were right behind them. Archers! Ned barked. Light the braziers! Torches flared to life, and men knocked dragonglass-tipped arrows. The wildlings rushed toward the gate, screaming for help. At their heels, whites shambled and leapt, eyes aglow. The watchers on the walls unleashed a volley of arrows, some of which found their targets, dropping whites in a shower of ice shards. Others missed or bounced off the ground, for the range was still great. Jeor Mormont ordered the gate partially open to admit the refugees, but the whites pressed close behind. A savage skirmish erupted at the threshold, with black brothers and northern soldiers stabbing at the dead as the wildlings stumbled through. Ned joined the fray, slicing at the arms of grasping corpses. He cursed how strong they were, even half-rotten. Fire flared as men thrust torches at them, and the whites screeched, staggering back. Some took more than a dozen blows before collapsing. A few had to be hacked into pieces. Finally, the last wildling stumbled inside, and the gate slammed shut. The watchers atop the wall sent another hail of arrows, driving the remaining whites away. The courtyard was chaotic, filled with sobbing families, panting guards, and the stench of burnt flesh. Ned spotted Jon Snow, sword in hand, helping a wounded black brother to the maester. Their eyes met, and Ned saw mirrored in Jon's gaze the same grim realization: these attacks would only increase in frequency as more refugees arrived. At dawn, Ned joined Mormont for a tally of the dead. 5 watchers had fallen, plus several wildlings. The whites had left half a dozen corpses behind that needed immediate burning. They found no sign of a White Walker among them, just lesser undead. That at least was a small mercy. But the watchers discovered tracks circling the area as if an unseen presence had observed the entire engagement before vanishing. In the days that followed, more such raids occurred. Usually small groups easily repelled by the newly bolstered defenses. But each time, the whites tested the response, growing bolder. Men whispered that the White Walkers were learning. Ned felt the tension coil inside him like a drawn bowstring. If the undead ever arrived in massed force, a single castle might not be enough. Even with the additional northern soldiers, Castle Black had limited resources. In the midst of this simmering crisis, a messenger arrived from the Shadow Tower, breathless and near delirious from riding hard. He brought news that turned Ned's blood to ice. A large host of undead, hundreds, perhaps more, had been sighted in the mountains, moving with a purpose. The watchers suspected they were heading for the gap near the Milkwater. If they crossed, they could approach Castle Black from the west or push on toward the Shivering Sea to encircle them from the east. Either way, it spelled a major assault. Jeor Mormont summoned Ned and his officers. The old bear's eyes gleamed with fierce resolve. It seems the others grow bold. We must act. We can't wait for them to gather unstoppable numbers. We'll march out and meet them on ground of our choosing. Ned nodded, though dread churned in his gut. If we cede the initiative, we'll be swarmed here. Better to face them in the open, with cavalry and archers. Jon Snow stood near the map, Longclaw sheathed at his hip. He tapped the location near the Millwater. We could block them at a narrow ravine. The land is rough, but that might work to our advantage. We can place men above on the ridges with arrows and dragaglass, set fires if needed. Ned studied the map. We must be mindful they can climb or slip around. But it's a plan. We'll bring 2,000 men from the castle. With the watchers who remain behind, that still leaves a strong garrison. But we risk meeting a host of 1,000 or more whites. Mormont's expression was grim. Then we'd best fight well. If the White Walkers themselves appear, we'll rely on our dragonglass and your men's steel. We have a handful of Valyrian blades. Let's pray that's enough. So they prepared for a decisive engagement that might define the fate of the North. Ned oversaw the selection of men who would ride out. Some watchers stayed behind to hold Castle Black, including Samwell Tarly to coordinate ravens. Jon insisted on going, eager to face the threat and prove the watch's mettle. Mormont, too, would march, unwilling to hide behind walls when the crucial battle loomed. On the eve of departure, Ned found himself alone on the ramparts, gazing over the moonlit snowfields. The men below readied weapons, tested siege equipment, loaded wagons with tinder and oil. The stillness of the night pressed on him, filled with the hush before a storm. He thought of Catelyn, safe in Winterfell for now, and his children. He prayed to the old gods for strength. The memory of Frostfires flickered in his mind. Would the brood come in their hour of need, or were they alone? He heard footsteps behind him. Jon Snow approached, cloak billowing, Ghost the direwolf padding silently at his side. Jon paused, letting the wind whip around them. "Father," he said softly, "if I don't make it back, I want you to know I'm proud to be your son." Ned's throat tightened. "Jon, you will make it back. We both will." A bittersweet smile touched Jon's lips. "I'm not a boy anymore. I know war claims lives. But I accept my duty. The Watch stands against the darkness, and I stand with the Watch." Ned placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "You are a Stark, regardless of your birth. I couldn't be prouder. We'll face this together." They stood side by side, father and son, gazing into the moonlit north where the land stretched into an endless expanse of white. Beyond that horizon, the dead gathered and monstrous powers moved unseen. The next dawn would see them ride to meet a foe older than recorded history. Whether they found victory or death, Ned Stark knew they had little choice. The lines were drawn. Morning arrived in a swirl of snow. The gates of Castle Black groaned open. 2,000 men, watchers in black, northern levies in gray and brown, filed out under Ned Stark's command. At their head rode Jeor Mormont on a sturdy courser, the black bear sigil on his banner. Ned rode by his side, cloak snapping in the wind, and Jon flanked them, Ghost loping along. Spears bristled, horses snorted, men's breaths misted. They passed beyond the wall into the domain of winter's wrath. The moan of wind through the pines was their constant companion. A hush settled over the column as the men recognized the gravity of their mission. Dragonglass weapons lay in bundles. Torches and oil casks rattled in wagons. They would need it all. For days they traveled west, crossing frozen streams and winding around hills. Scouts ranged ahead, searching for any sign of the undead host. Occasionally they found footprints or half-eaten carcasses. Fear clung to every trooper, but the presence of so many armed men offered some reassurance. At night, they formed a circle of fires, posting heavy watch. Each time the wind howled, men jerked awake, certain they heard the approach of the dead. At length, the scouts returned with dire news. They'd spotted the White Army less than a day's ride north, moving slowly among the foothills. They estimated at least 800 corpses, possibly more, accompanied by unknown numbers of White Walkers. Mormont cursed softly but pressed on. They would meet the foe near a narrow pass along a tributary of the Milkwater, where steep cliffs might give them vantage. Ned led the men into the pass well before dawn, climbing the crags to place archers with dragonglass arrows. Others prepared small barricades and traps along the mouth of the gorge. Oil was spread behind hidden boulders. The plan: lure the whites in, pin them with the ridges, then unleash fire and arrows. If the White Walkers showed themselves, men armed with Valyrian steel and dragonglass would converge. The hours dragged. A dim, colorless dawn seeped into the sky. Men shivered in readiness. Ned stood near Mormont behind a low wall of ice-laden stones. Jon and Ghost crouched nearby, hearts pounding. The hush of the pass weighed on them. No bird song, no animal cry, only the keening wind. Then they came. First, a faint sound, rasping moans and the crunch of snow under countless feet. Dark silhouettes emerged from behind a ridge. Even from a distance, Ned's blood chilled. Some whites wore tattered furs or mail, others were nearly skeletal. Their eyes gleamed with unholy light. At their head shambled a colossal figure, a giant white, perhaps, hunched and rotting, dragging a broken tree trunk as a club. The stench of death wafted on the wind. Mormont raised his hand. Archers tensed, arrows knocked. Ned waited until the main body of the undead moved into the pass. His heart thundered. If any White Walkers were among them, they remained hidden in the swirling snow. With a sudden roar, the monstrous giant bellowed a guttural cry. The whites surged forward as if sensing living flesh. Men atop the cliffs loosed their first volley. Dozens of whites dropped, pierced by dragonglass, dissolving into shards of ice and flesh. But hundreds more pushed on. The pass erupted into chaos. Ned signaled for the second line of archers to fire flaming arrows. They struck oil-laden patches, igniting walls of flame that consumed the front ranks of the undead. The stink of burning corpses churned the stomach. The giant white, scorched but unrelenting, barreled through the flames, crushing barricades with its trunk club. Men scattered, some screaming as rotting hands dragged them down. Jon led a squad of watchers to flank the giant, dragging along spears with dragonglass tips. They stabbed at its legs, but the monstrous corpse barely faltered. With a swing of its trunk, it sent half a dozen watchers flying. Jon narrowly dove aside, rolling in the snow. Ghost leapt, sinking teeth into the giant's arm. The creature howled, flailing. Ned vaulted a collapsed barrier, leading more men to support Jon. They harried the giant, slashing at putrid flesh. Finally, someone drove a dragonglass spear into the base of its skull. A sickening crack, and the giant collapsed in a thunderous heap, shuddering before going still. Yet the rest of the undead pressed forward. Archers on the cliffs continued raining arrows, but the whites kept coming, unstoppable in their lack of fear. Oil fires raged. Bodies littered the pass, living and dead. Ned's breath burned in his lungs as he hacked at a white with his sword. Ordinary steel did little unless he severed limbs, so he switched to a dragonglass dag. Plunging it into the white's chest. It collapsed in a puff of icy shards. A horn blast cut through the din. Mormont bellowed, "Watch for White Walkers." Men spun, scanning the swirling snow. Then Ned saw them, stepping from behind the masked whites, tall figures with armor that reflected the morning light, eyes glowing blue. Their presence chilled the air further. One raised an icy blade, gesturing at the living. Whites parted, forming a corridor for the walkers to advance. Ned's pulse raced. This was the true test. "Form up," he shouted to the men around him. "Dragonglass ready." He glimpsed Jon among a group of watchers, lifting Longclaw in challenge. Then, with inhuman speed, the White Walkers charged. Their blades clashed with men's steel, shattering normal swords in an instant. Those who carried dragonglass or Valyrian steel fared better, but the walkers moved like deadly wraiths, each blow precise. A swirl of frost followed them, stinging the eyes of the living. Ned found himself face to face with one, a gaunt figure whose armor glimmered like brittle ice. its mouth curved in a silent snarl. Ned thrust with his dragonglass dagger, but the walker parried with ease, snapping the dagger's obsidian tip. Ned stumbled back. The creature lunged, blade whistling toward his neck. He barely dodged, feeling the cold burn of the air near that blade. An arrow from above struck the walker's back, but it shattered against its armor. The being turned, hissing, giving Ned a moment to scramble for another dagger from a fallen man's belt. He yelled for help, but chaos ruled the pass. Another walker was dueling John, while Mormont battled a third, his men's weapons shattering left and right. A savage roar filled the air. Ned spun to see the monstrous shape of a white bear crashing into the flank of the living, scattering men. The White Walkers pressed the advantage, moving in a lethal dance. The pass threatened to become a massacre as waves of whites flung themselves forward, heedless of losses. The living reeled, only dragonglass and flame holding the lines. Then a new sound rumbled across the sky. A deep, resonant roar, not of a beast in agony but of raw, cold power. For an instant everything paused, men, whites, walkers all glancing upward. The storm clouds parted, revealing the colossal shape of a dragon, wings spread wide, pale scales shining like winter moonlight. Frostfire. A second roar answered from behind it, another ice dragon. They dove toward the battlefield, exhaling clouds of freezing mist. White walkers hissed, stepping back as the dragon's chill blanketed the pass. Whites froze in place, limbs creaking. Some shattered under the slightest pressure. The white bear stiffened, its rotted hide caked with hoarfrost. Cheers broke from the living even as they shielded themselves from the intensifying cold. Ned felt an overwhelming rush of relief and awe. The brood had returned. Frostfire swooped overhead, massive beyond measure now, letting loose a roar that shook the cliffs. Whites splintered by the dozens, undone by a deeper, more potent cold. The White Walkers reeled as if the dragon's presence clashed with their own magic. A few turned and fled into swirling snow. Ned seized the moment, rallying his men. Drive them back. Fire and dragonglass. He charged, plunging a fresh dragonglass blade into a stumbling white. Around him, watchers and northern levies surged forward with renewed spirit. Overhead, the dragons continued their assault, buffeting the pass with chilling gusts. John, locked in a deadly struggle with a walker, found an opening as the creature hesitated, perhaps sensing Frostfire's might. Longclaw flashed, Valyrian steel meeting ice. The walker screeched, arm fracturing. John pressed, driving the blade deep into its chest. With a shrill cry, it shattered, collapsing into shards. Ghost howled triumphantly, biting at the remains. Mormont, with help from half a dozen watchers, overwhelmed another walker using torches and obsidian spears. The pass erupted in a final cacophony of noise, men shouting in victory, whites snapping in their death throes, dragons roaring overhead. Then, as quickly as it began, the undead lines collapsed. Most whites had been destroyed or lay scattered in broken chunks. The remaining White Walkers retreated into the storm, their aura of cold receding. A ragged cheer went up from the living. Bodies lay everywhere, a testament to the ferocity of the battle. Frostfire circled once, then descended near Ned, stirring a tempest of wind and snow with its landing. Ned staggered, shielding his eyes. When the gale eased, he looked upon the enormous dragon, heart-pounding. The great creature's eyes, swirling with pale blue, fixed on him for a long moment. He reached out a trembling hand, recalling the crypts of Winterfell where their bond had first begun. Frostfire rumbled softly, lowering its head. Ned felt a wave of emotion, relief, gratitude, and something deeper wash over him. With a careful step, he placed his palm on the dragon's freezing scales, ignoring the sting. Men stared in silent wonder. John approached, panting, his face streaked with ash and blood. He gazed at Frostfire with a mixture of awe and caution. The second dragon landed behind the first, this one smaller but still formidable, exhaling a misty breath that crackled in the frigid air. Ned's mind reeled. They had come. They had saved them at the brink of defeat. He swallowed hard, turning to look at the battlefield. The White Walkers had retreated, their whites mostly destroyed. A major blow, perhaps, but not the end of the war. Still, it was a victory and a sign that man and ice dragon together might stand a chance against the others. Jeor Mormont limped over, leaning on a broken spear shaft for support. He eyed the dragons warily, then gave Ned a curt nod. Your monstrous friends arrived in the nick of time, Stark. I'd almost given us up for dead. Ned withdrew his hand from Frostfire's scales. They're not monstrosities, Lord Commander. They are living creatures of ice, and they've chosen to fight beside us, this day at least. Mormont managed a weary chuckle. Well, I'm grateful all the same. He surveyed the carnage. We've lost many men, but the dead lost more. Let's see if the others dare challenge us again soon. John stared at the dragons, at Frostfire's watchful gaze. They must have known the White Walkers were massing. Perhaps the brood felt the threat in their territory. Or perhaps your bond drew them here, Father. Ned could only shake his head. I don't fully understand it myself. But we owe them our lives. Frostfire let out a low rumble, turning its massive head toward the distant north. The smaller dragon nudged at some white fragments on the ground as if checking for signs of movement. Men kept a respectful distance, uncertain whether the dragons might turn on them. But for now at least, they stood in alliance. Then Ned saw another figure stumbling across the battlefield, a battered man in black, carrying a limp companion. The living were salvaging what survivors they could. The scale of loss would weigh on them for weeks to come, but it was far less than if the dragons had not appeared. Night would soon fall, and they needed to gather the dead for burning, treat the wounded, and secure the area. Mormont barked orders to his officers. John set about checking for pockets of whites. Ned lingered beside Frostfire, one hand resting on the frigid flank as if anchoring himself to reality. This was no dream. They had found a weapon to rival the White Walker's icy power. Yet his chest tightened. Even with the brute's help, the others remained formidable. They would strike again, likely with more cunning. And beyond the north, the realm was consumed by its own petty wars, blind to the true threat. But at least for this moment, this battered path strewn with corpses, Ned Stark could claim a victory. The living had stood against the dead, and the dead had broken. As the sky darkened, flakes of fresh snow drifted down, settling on Frostfire's colossal wings. Ned gazed up at the dragon's majestic form, a swirl of cold brilliance in the deepening twilight. We'll stand together again when the next battle comes, he murmured, half to the dragon, half to the old gods. Fire and blood once shaped the realm. Perhaps ice and honor shall save it. No answer came, save for the quiet crackle of distant fires and the faint groans of wounded men. Frostfire blinked slowly as if acknowledging his words, then lifted its head to the darkening sky, releasing a roar that reverberated among the peaks. The smaller dragon echoed the cry, and for an instant Ned swore the wind itself hushed in deference. Then the moment passed. Men worked, the dragons watched, and the swirling night pressed in, reminding all that though they had won a battle, a greater war lay ahead. Yet for that night, at least, Ned Stark allowed himself to believe that there was hope in the midst of endless winter, that the brood of ice dragons, bound by fate and forged in the cold halls of Winterfell, might indeed become the realm's shield against a darkness older than time. And as he turned to help the living gather their wounded, Ned felt the fierce certainty that House Stark would not stand alone in the final dawn. The chill of ice and the courage of man had joined forces, and in that union lay the seeds of salvation.